Mars has endured billions of years of punishment, meteors, dust storms, cosmic winters, but it has never faced a trespasser like 3R/Atlas. This interstellar wanderer is not just another comet, it is an alien refugee carrying the chemistry of a dead star, drifting into our solar system with motives written in physics we barely understand. Its path past Mars in October 2025 is close enough to rewrite history. Some predict a graceful pass, a cosmic shrug. Others whisper of contamination, orbital chaos, or the seeding of alien matter into Martian soil. The nightmare is not that Atlas collides with Mars, it's that it doesn't. That it brushes past, leaving behind a legacy subtle enough to escape detection, but permanent enough to poison every dream of colonization. It begins, as most cosmic horrors do, not with a blinding explosion or a sudden planetary death scream, but with a quiet notation in the logbooks of professional skywatchers. A faint smear of moving light in the constellation of Pisces, captured by an automated survey telescope that was never intended to find something quite so alien. On August 12, 2025, astronomers at the Pan-STARRS Observatory flagged the anomaly, a fast-moving body on a hyperbolic trajectory, streaking in from the outer reaches of interstellar space. It was quickly assigned the designation 3I/Atlas, marking it as only the third confirmed interstellar object ever detected by humanity. The world had seen Oumuamua in 2017, a tumbling cigar-shaped mystery that confounded every theory of comet and asteroid formation. Then came Borisov in 2019, a more traditional cometary interloper that sprayed volatile ices into the void as it passed through our neighborhood. But 3I/Atlas was neither cigar nor comet in the ordinary sense. Its orbit was steeper, its albedo stranger, and its behavior more unsettling than either of its predecessors. Where Borisov had looked almost comfortingly familiar, like a cousin from a faraway stellar clan, Atlas looked more like something expelled, rejected even from a cosmic foundry, operating under rules we do not yet understand. From the beginning, the numbers refused to make sense. Based on its approach speed, over 87 kilometers per second relative to the Sun, far faster than typical comets, 3I/Atlas could not have originated in the gravitational nursery of any nearby stellar system. Some calculations suggested it might have been flung outward from a region more than 400 light-years away, a staggering exile time of millions of years in interstellar darkness. Yet even that vast odyssey could not explain its composition. Spectroscopic analysis from ground-based telescopes detected bizarre ratios of carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and complex organics. Not only were the proportions inconsistent with comets in our own solar system, but some isotopic fingerprints hinted at formation conditions around stars of a different metallicity altogether, stars older and colder than our Sun, possibly long extinct. To hold in your mind the possibility that 3I/Atlas carries chemistry from a stellar corpse, atoms once cooked in the atmospheres of red giants, later scattered across the void, is to recognize that what is about to brush past Mars is not just a comet. It is a time capsule of alien stellar evolution, a chemical message older than Earth's continents, and perhaps older than life itself. But what truly unsettled astronomers was not Atlas's chemistry, but its erratic luminosity. Where most comets brighten predictably as they approach the Sun, shedding material in response to increasing heat, Atlas seemed to flare and dim without cause. Its light curve resembled a cardiogram gone mad. Sudden surges of brightness, followed by inexplicable drop-offs, some lasting mere hours, others stretching into days. By late September, before it even neared Mars, Atlas had experienced no fewer than 9 outburst events, each spewing plumes of gas and dust stretching millions of kilometers into space. The comet's radius was already more than 150,000 kilometers across, larger than Jupiter itself, and yet somehow the nucleus remained hidden, a cloaked heart, whose true size and shape evaded even the sharp eyes of the James Webb Space Telescope. It was as if the object were deliberately concealing itself within a shroud of chaotic activity, a veil woven from carbon dioxide and ionized dust. Some astronomers whispered in closed conferences that such behavior bordered on mechanical instability, as though Atlas were barely holding itself together, one catastrophic fragmentation event away from scattering itself across the solar system like shrapnel from a cosmic grenade. This would have been troubling enough if Atlas were destined to bypass the inner planets by a wide margin. But its trajectory brought it terrifyingly close to the one world humanity has long dreamed of claiming as its second home, Mars. On October 3rd, 2025, a date now circled in red ink in every planetary defense agency's calendar, Atlas would make its closest approach to the red planet, passing within 30 million kilometers. To the average Earthbound observer, this sounds comfortably distant, nearly 80 times the Earth-Moon distance. But in cosmic terms, it is the astronomical equivalent of a razor's edge. Remember, the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs, the Chicxulub impactor, measured only 10 kilometers wide. Atlas's coma alone is 15,000 times that scale, and its nucleus, if it remains intact, could be anywhere from 5 to 50 kilometers across. A direct impact is mathematically improbable, but the specter of fragmentation haunts every calculation. If the nucleus fractures at precisely the wrong point in its orbit, fragments could be nudged into paths that intersect Mars directly, turning an unlikely miss into a catastrophic hit. Planetary defense models already suggest that even fragments as small as 200 meters across could excavate craters larger than major cities, while anything above 1 kilometer would be an extinction-class event for any fragile biosphere. And Mars, with its thin air and unshielded surface, is fragility incarnate. The European Space Agency, NASA, and independent observatories across the world have scrambled to track Atlas with the precision of surgeons handling nitroglycerin. Yet just as tension reached its peak, nature played a cruel trick. As October 3rd approaches, solar conjunction sets in, the alignment of the sun between Earth and Mars, a period when radio communications and telescope observations are severely disrupted. In other words, precisely when Atlas reaches its closest point to Mars, Earth's eyes will be partially blinded by the sun's glare. The timing could not be more sinister if scripted by an uncaring universe. We are preparing to witness the most consequential interstellar encounter in human history, and we will be forced to do so through a haze of uncertainty, relying on half-blind instruments and robotic proxies orbiting Mars. The irony is sharp. Billions of dollars in spacecraft circle the red planet, from MRO and MAVEN to Europe's Trace Gas Orbiter, yet none were built to track hypervelocity interstellar debris fields. Their cameras are tuned to rocks and dust devils, not alien wanderers vomiting ice and organics into the void. Should Atlas lose its fragile cohesion near Mars, we may find our robotic emissaries swallowed by electromagnetic storms and debris clouds before they can transmit anything meaningful back home. This is the stage on which October 3rd will play out, a fragile Mars, a mysterious interstellar intruder, and a human civilization watching nervously from 140 million miles away with no ability to intervene. If Atlas remains intact, it may sweep past Mars as a spectacular but harmless cosmic sideshow. If it fractures, we could witness the seeding of the Martian system with alien material, a contamination event whose consequences could echo for centuries. And if the very worst occurs, a large fragment colliding directly with the red planet, we would see Mars transformed from a colonization dream into a planetary cautionary tale, a silent graveyard glowing with the chemical fingerprints of another star. Humanity's gamble on Mars as our backup world could be undone before it even begins, not by our own hubris, but by a visitor that does not know we exist and does not care what we dream. If Chapter 1 was the prologue, the stage setting for a cosmic drama, Chapter 2 is where the horror sharpens into focus. To grasp the scope of what Mars faces, you must abandon any sense of comfort drawn from ordinary probabilities. Astronomers often reassure the public by repeating the mantra of low likelihood. After all, Earth is bombarded by space rocks constantly, and most burn away harmlessly in our atmosphere. Mars, however, has no such protection. Its atmosphere is barely 1% the thickness of Earth's, composed almost entirely of carbon dioxide, incapable of slowing even modestly sized projectiles. Where an asteroid just 25 meters across disintegrated high above Chelyabinsk in 2013, creating a shockwave that shattered thousands of windows, the same body hitting Mars would slam directly into the ground with energy equivalent to a small nuclear bomb. Now scale that up to fragments hundreds of meters wide, fragments that could easily be produced if Atlas sheds even a fraction of its unstable nucleus during its close pass. These wouldn't be mere rocks falling from the sky. They would be city killers, continent scorchers, atmosphere scorching monsters. And Mars, already fragile, already half dead, has no resilience left to spare. The numbers grow more unsettling the deeper you run them. Consider a fragment just 500 meters across, a chunk of volatile ice and alien dust hurled at 60 kilometers per second by the cruel mathematics of orbital mechanics. The kinetic energy of such an impact would exceed 20,000 megatons of TNT, more than 1,000 times greater than the combined nuclear arsenals of Earth. The result would be a crater tens of kilometers wide, with ejecta hurled into the sky at hypersonic speeds. Mars's low gravity would ensure that much of this debris reached escape velocity, forming a temporary ring of orbiting rubble. But what remained airborne would plunge back down in waves, igniting the thin atmosphere into global dust storms of unparalleled ferocity. We already know that Martian dust storms can grow planet-wide, blocking sunlight for weeks or months at a time. An impact-generated storm would make these look like trivial weather events. Instead, we'd see a permanent choking haze that could last years, plunging surface temperatures by tens of degrees and dooming any future plans for solar-powered colonies. The red planet would become not just red, but black, a smothered world swirling in a shroud of alien dust. And the dust is only the beginning. Buried beneath Mars's crust lies vast reservoirs of frozen water and carbon dioxide relics of a wetter past. A sufficiently violent impact could vaporize millions of tons of this ancient ice in seconds, blasting it into the atmosphere where it would interact with Atlas's exotic chemistry. Carbon dioxide would thicken the atmosphere temporarily, creating a greenhouse effect that might paradoxically warm the planet in the long term, but the immediate aftermath would be catastrophic. Imagine acid-laced snowstorms falling across the Martian plains, contaminating soil and poisoning any future attempts to extract water for human use. The trace gas orbiter might detect spikes of methane or other organic gases, but we would have no way of knowing whether these came from native Martian sources or from Atlas's alien contribution. In a cruel twist of fate, the very first definitive discovery of organic chemistry on Mars might turn out to be useless, its origins irreparably contaminated by an interstellar intruder. Centuries of planetary science could be thrown into chaos, every result thereafter questioned, every mission tainted by doubt. But the scenario darkens further when we consider Mars's moons, Phobos and Deimos. Both are fragile, irregular rocks already teetering in unstable orbits. Phobos in particular is spiraling slowly inward and will eventually crash into Mars within 50 million years. A major impact on Mars could perturb these delicate orbital balances dramatically, accelerating timelines by orders of magnitude. Debris hurled into space from an Atlas fragment impact could slam into Phobos directly, fracturing the Moon and seeding Mars with yet more orbiting shrapnel. The result would be a crude, chaotic ring system, not the elegant bands of Saturn, but a deadly halo of jagged boulders, whipping around the planet at kilometers per second. For spacecraft, this would be a death sentence. Any attempt to insert into orbit would mean threading through a minefield of unpredictable debris. For human colonization, it would be the end of the dream. You cannot build a Mars base if you cannot safely deliver supplies or personnel to orbit. In this scenario, Atlas doesn't just scar Mars's surface, it locks the planet behind a wall of stone, cutting it off from human reach for centuries. And yet, the worst-case scenario may not involve a direct hit at all. Imagine instead that Atlas fractures just enough to spray thousands of smaller fragments across a range of orbital trajectories, none of which strike Mars immediately. Instead, they form a swarm, a debris cloud that dogs Mars for decades. Each fragment becomes its own hazard, some eventually pulled into the atmosphere, others remaining in long looping paths around the Sun that intersect Mars again and again in future years. This is not a single catastrophe, but a prolonged siege. Mars would become a target in a cosmic shooting gallery, struck not once but repeatedly, each impact compounding the damage, each storm worsening the climate chaos. And because Mars lacks Earth's geological vigor, no plate tectonics, no robust weather cycles, its scars would linger, unhealed, visible forever. The Mars of tomorrow could be a planet ringed by impact basins and shadowed by dust storms, not a cradle for colonies, but a graveyard of failed ambitions. For future generations, the phrase Mars colonization might sound as naive as Atlantis exploration, a dream sunk beneath forces we never controlled. What makes all this so terrifying is the fact that we don't know what Atlas is. The coma conceals the nucleus, the outbursts mask its internal structure, and the erratic behavior defies every comet model we've built. We don't know if it's solid or rubble, if it's fragile or iron hard, if its chemistry is inert or dangerously reactive. We don't even know how much mass it carries. For all we know, Atlas could be a cluster of smaller bodies loosely held together, already primed to scatter, and that ignorance means the worst-case scenarios are not just speculative, they are entirely plausible. The universe has a way of punishing our arrogance, and nothing would be more arrogant than assuming Mars, a planet battered for 4 billion years, is somehow safe from a visitor forged in a different star's crucible. October 3rd, 2025, may not be remembered as the day Mars died, but it could be remembered as the day humanity's illusion of safety in the cosmos was shattered. There is a peculiar cruelty to the universe. Sometimes the most devastating catastrophes arrive not in the form of solid impacts, but in disturbances that are invisible, intangible, and all the more terrifying for their subtlety. When we think of cosmic disasters, we picture craters, fireballs, and shattered landscapes. But what if the real danger of Atlas is not its nucleus, not even its fragments, but the electromagnetic storm it drags across the void like a cometary whip? Mars, for all its desolate beauty, is uniquely vulnerable to such forces. Billions of years ago, the red planet possessed a magnetic field, a shield forged by its molten core that deflected the solar wind and protected its early oceans. But that dynamo died long ago, leaving Mars naked before the sun. Today, only faint magnetic scars remain, local anomalies, frozen in crustal rocks, weak echoes of a once mighty shield. For Earth, a passing comet's electromagnetic wake would be little more than an inconvenience. For Mars, it could be a planetary death sentence. To understand why, we must examine the strange behavior of Atlas's coma. Unlike ordinary comets, which release water vapor and dust in predictable patterns, Atlas has been venting vast plumes of ionized carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide, intermixed with exotic organic compounds. These gases interact with sunlight and the solar wind, creating massive clouds of plasma that extend millions of kilometers into space. Ordinarily, such plasma tails simply stream away harmlessly, sculpted by the sun's magnetic field into graceful ribbons visible from Earth. But Atlas's plasma emissions are not graceful. They are chaotic. Observations from NASA's Spherex telescope show twisting, braided structures in the ion tail, as though vast electrical currents are surging through it, generating turbulence on a scale never before seen. This means that as Atlas passes near Mars, the planet will be engulfed not just by dust and gas, but by electromagnetic turbulence strong enough to rewrite the rules of space weather. Picture what happens when that ion storm collides with Mars's weak, fragmented magnetic field. Instead of being deflected, the plasma plunges directly into the atmosphere, carrying charged particles that excite oxygen and carbon dioxide molecules. The result would be planet-wide auroras, but not the gentle green veils familiar from Earth's poles. These would be furious storms of light, visible across the entire sky, pulsing with red and violet as the ionosphere itself shudders under the assault. To an astronaut on the Martian surface, the effect would be apocalyptic, the sky ablaze with shimmering fire, lightning racing across the horizon, static electricity crackling through the thin air. And yet, the beauty would conceal destruction. These electromagnetic storms would induce powerful currents in every conductive system on the planet, from rover circuits to orbital satellites. Solar panels would overload and fail, communication arrays would flicker and die, and delicate scientific instruments would be reduced to fried silicon husks. In a single night, decades of exploration hardware could be silenced, leaving Mars not just storm-racked, but electronically mute. The consequences for the atmosphere itself would be even more disturbing. Mars's ionosphere is already fragile, a tenuous layer where solar radiation ionizes thin gases into a conducting plasma. When Atlas's storm passes through, it could overload this system, stripping electrons from vast swathes of atmosphere, creating what physicists call superionization events. The immediate effect would be to disrupt radio transmissions for weeks, severing communication between Earth and every asset on Mars. But the long-term effects could be worse. Ionized gases are more easily blown away by the solar wind, meaning Mars could lose significant fractions of its already meager atmosphere in the wake of Atlas's passage. Imagine a planet that has spent billions of years slowly bleeding its air into space, suddenly suffering a catastrophic hemorrhage, its sky thinning further, its surface even more exposed to radiation. Colonization plans that already teeter on the edge of feasibility would collapse entirely. Why build habitats on a world whose atmosphere can be shredded at any time by the ghost of an interstellar wanderer? And then comes the dust. Mars's surface is coated in a layer of fine electrically charged dust particles, relics of volcanic eruptions and ancient erosion. Under normal conditions, these dust grains are stirred by seasonal winds and sometimes whipped into planet-wide storms. But electromagnetic turbulence could supercharge this process. Atlas's plasma storm would deposit massive electrical charges across the surface, turning dust particles into miniature capacitors. The result? Dust storms laced with lightning, electrical tempests that dwarf anything Earth has ever seen. Where terrestrial thunderstorms discharge millions of volts, Martian dust storms under Atlas's influence could generate billions, unleashing arcs of electricity that leap dozens of kilometers across the sky. These storms would not end in days or weeks. Feedback loops between charged dust and turbulent winds could sustain them for months, even years. Mars would become a planet permanently veiled in a crackling shroud, its surface cloaked in darkness, its skies alive with fire. Colonists would not just struggle to survive, they would find survival impossible as habitats and equipment failed under relentless bombardment. The insidious genius of this scenario is that Atlas would not need to touch Mars to destroy its habitability. No crater, no impact, no smoking ruin, just an invisible storm of particles altering atmospheric chemistry, electromagnetic balance, and weather dynamics. And because these changes operate on feedback loops, the effects might persist long after Atlas itself has sailed back into the void. By 2026, Mars could be trapped in a state of permanent electrical turbulence, a world of storms that never end, dust that never settles, and skies that never clear. For Earth, this would be a psychological catastrophe as much as a scientific one. The dream of Mars, the hope of a second home, would be extinguished, not with a bang, but with a shimmer of alien auroras. The red planet would still orbit the sun, still beckon in the night sky, but its surface would be cursed, uninhabitable, forever hostile to human life. The cruelest irony. We might not even realize the full scope of this disaster for years, because our orbiters, rovers, and instruments, our eyes and ears on Mars, would already be gone, silenced by the very storm we are trying to study. When planetary scientists speak in hushed tones about contamination, they usually mean the accidental transport of terrestrial microbes from spacecraft to another world, or the risk of bringing Martian samples back to Earth with unwanted hitchhikers. But the arrival of 3I/Atlas forces us to confront a nightmare scenario that transcends our carefully worded treaties and laboratory sterilization protocols. This is not about our bacteria clinging to a rover's wheel. This is about chemistry, perhaps even biology, born under a foreign star, carried across the abyss of interstellar space for millions of years, now brushing close enough to Mars to alter its environment forever. For the first time in history, humanity must seriously entertain the possibility that we are about to watch an alien seeding event unfold in real time, whether we want it or not. Atlas is no ordinary wanderer. Its coma contains massive amounts of carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and water vapor, But layered within those emissions are signatures that don't fit into the neat categories of solar system chemistry. Preliminary spectral analyses have hinted at long-chain hydrocarbons and even possible polycyclic aromatic compounds, molecules that on Earth are associated with prebiotic chemistry, the building blocks of life. These could be inert relics, cosmic fossils carried unchanged for millions of years. But they could also be reactive, forming new structures under the influence of sunlight, cosmic rays, or catalytic surfaces. Mars, with its mineral-rich soil, its perchlorates, and its frozen subsurface brines, could provide the perfect laboratory for these alien molecules to awaken. What begins as a dusting of cometary material across the Martian surface could evolve into something far more disturbing, a planet-wide chemical transformation guided not by human engineering, but by the blind hand of interstellar chemistry. The frightening part is how little would be required. Mars's atmosphere is so thin and its biosphere so sterile that even a modest infusion of novel chemistry could have disproportionate effects. Imagine just a few grams of Atlas's exotic organics landing in a meltwater pocket beneath the surface. In Earth's laboratories, we've already seen amino acids form spontaneously under the right conditions when simple precursors are exposed to ultraviolet radiation or electrical discharge. Now imagine those same processes acting on molecules never before seen in our solar system. The result might not be life in the way we understand it, no crawling Martian microbes or wriggling alien worms, but something stranger, self-replicating chemical systems, catalytic networks that consume resources and spread like wildfire through the regolith. Such systems could contaminate every experiment we send, rendering it impossible to distinguish native Martian life from alien imposters. Worse, they could actively interfere with human colonization, clogging water extraction systems, poisoning oxygen generation units, or producing toxic byproducts that seep into every attempt at terraforming. In this sense, the greatest danger may not be death, but confusion, the slow realization that Mars has become scientifically and practically unusable because its chemistry is no longer its own. But the contamination nightmare doesn't end there. Consider the role of Mars's dust storms. If Atlas sheds organic-rich particles into the atmosphere, those compounds would not remain localized. Mars's storms can engulf the planet in weeks, lifting fine grains of dust to altitudes of 60 kilometers and carrying them across hemispheres. Within months, any contamination would be global, coating every future landing site, every rover, every planned habitat. Colonists arriving in the 2030 CES might find themselves stepping into a world already transformed, their equipment fouled by chemistry they cannot identify, their experiments producing false positives, their crops struggling in soils laced with alien toxins. The red planet might still look like Mars, but in its chemistry it would be something new, something that no longer fits into our categories of barren versus fertile, habitable versus hostile. It would be, in a word, corrupted. What makes this scenario so uniquely terrifying is the timescale. An impact is dramatic and immediate. The crater is visible, the dust storm spreads, the catastrophe is undeniable. But contamination works slowly, insidiously, over years or decades. By the time we realize what has happened, it could be too late. The first signs might be subtle anomalies in atmospheric readings from orbiters, a trace of methane here, a spike in ethane there, then false positives in rover experiments, hints of amino acids, fragments of strange polymers. At first, scientists would celebrate life on Mars. The headlines would explode across the world, funding would surge, colonization dreams would bloom. Only later, when careful analysis reveals isotopic ratios inconsistent with Martian geology, would the truth begin to dawn. What we had found was not life, but contamination, not Martian biology, but Atlas's shadow. And with that realization would come despair, because once alien chemistry has been introduced, there is no way to remove it. Mars would be forever tainted, not just scientifically, but existentially. We would never again know if what we find there belongs to Mars or to a visitor from another sun. The legal and ethical frameworks collapse under this possibility. The Outer Space Treaty forbids harmful contamination of celestial bodies, but it was written with human spacecraft in mind, not with comets from other star systems. Who is responsible if Atlas seeds Mars with alien chemistry? No one. Nothing. There is no defendant in this cosmic court, no treaty to enforce, no cleanup crew to dispatch. The contamination would be irreversible, and its consequences incalculable. Future generations might curse us for failing to prepare, but in truth, we could never have prevented it. How do you sterilize an interstellar visitor 100 kilometers across? How do you quarantine an alien chemistry that rides on dust storms and penetrates every crevice of a planet's surface? The answer is simple: you don't. You watch, you measure, and you mourn the loss of certainty. And here lies the most insidious possibility of all, that contamination from Atlas does not simply taint Mars, but outcompetes it. If alien molecules prove more efficient at absorbing energy, catalyzing reactions, or forming stable networks than whatever fragile chemistry Mars still holds, then the red planet could effectively be rewritten at the molecular level. Its future evolution would no longer belong to itself, but to Atlas. And should humanity ever succeed in colonizing Mars, we would not be settlers on a pristine world, but squatters on a chemically hijacked one, forced to adapt to the rules of a chemistry not our own. Mars would no longer be Mars. It would be an extension of another star's biology, a foothold for interstellar life to spread further. And if dust storms loft that chemistry high enough, if solar winds carry it outward, then perhaps Earth itself, centuries hence, will not be spared. Atlas might be the Trojan horse of cosmic biology, and October 3rd, 2025 could mark the day the infection began. When we imagine the dangers of an interstellar comet like Atlas, we instinctively look down to impacts on planetary surfaces, to contamination of soils, to storms sweeping the atmosphere, but the more insidious danger lies above, in the fragile ballet of moons, orbits, and debris fields that surround every planet. Mars's system is precarious even at the best of times. Unlike Earth's single stabilizing moon, Mars has only two diminutive satellites, Phobos and Deimos, both irregular, lumpy chunks of carbonaceous rock. Phobos, the closer of the two, is on a death spiral, orbiting so near the planet that tidal forces are gradually pulling it inward. In about 50 million years, it will either crash into Mars or shatter into a ring. Deimos, further out, drifts slowly away. Both are thought to be captured asteroids, never quite assimilated into Mars's gravitational embrace, and both are weaklings, porous, fractured, barely held together. This means that any perturbation, any injection of debris or tidal stress could destabilize them catastrophically. And Atlas, with its unpredictable coma, fragmentation risk, and gravitational perturbations, could provide exactly that. At first glance, the gravitational influence of Atlas on Mars's moons seems negligible. Even at its closest approach of 30 million kilometers, Atlas's pull on Phobos or Deimos is minuscule compared to that of Mars itself. But orbital mechanics is a cruel and subtle game. A system already teetering on instability can be tipped by the smallest nudge, and Phobos is the very definition of precarious. Its orbit, just 6,000 kilometers above the Martian surface, lies well within the planet's Roche limit. The tidal stresses already stretch it like a stone caught in a giant's fist, producing fractures across its surface that run for kilometers. It is a moon dying in slow motion. If even a small fragment of Atlas, a block of ice no larger than a football field, were to slam into Phobos at interstellar velocity, the impact would not simply chip a crater. It could shatter the moon outright, releasing millions of tons of rubble into orbit. Within days, Mars would be encircled by a ring of debris, not the elegant, icy rings of Saturn, but a jagged, murderous halo of rock and dust. And unlike Saturn's stable, ancient rings, this one would be chaotic, unstable, prone to collisions that would continually grind debris into finer shards, a permanent minefield around the planet. The consequences for exploration would be catastrophic. Every orbiter, from NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter to ESA's Trace Gas Orbiter, would be at risk of destruction. Spacecraft cannot dodge clouds of debris that cover entire orbital paths, and the smallest fragment moving at kilometers per second could shred a satellite in an instant. Human missions, once planned for the 2030s, would become impossible. No crewed spacecraft could safely enter Mars orbit without running the gauntlet of a debris storm that might persist for centuries. The red planet would be transformed from a target of opportunity into a fortress locked behind a wall of rubble. Humanity could look at it through telescopes, send probes on risky flybys, but Mars itself would be cut off, rendered unreachable by the very orbital chaos we failed to predict. But the nightmare doesn't end with Phobos. Consider Deimos, the smaller, more distant moon. Deimos is tiny, barely 15 kilometers across, orbiting nearly 24,000 kilometers from Mars. Its orbit is more stable than Phobos's, but it is also more vulnerable to gravitational perturbations from external bodies. If Atlas fragments create a temporary debris field around Mars, Deimos could be struck as well, and unlike Phobos, Deimos has no tidal fractures holding it together. A sufficiently energetic impact could send it spiraling outward, destabilized, potentially ejected from Mars's orbit entirely. Imagine a future in which Deimos, once a loyal companion of the red planet, drifts free into a heliocentric orbit, another wandering asteroid set loose by the interstellar visitor. For planetary scientists, this would be an unparalleled disaster, a reminder that moons can be lost, orbital histories rewritten, celestial configurations forever altered by chance encounters. And for colonists, it would be another blow. Deimos has long been proposed as a staging ground for human exploration, a stable outpost in low gravity from which missions to the surface could be launched. The loss of Deimos would be the loss of one of Mars's most promising footholds. The most terrifying possibility is that both moons destabilize at once, creating a chain reaction of orbital chaos. Phobos shatters into a debris ring, Deimos is nudged off orbit, and Mars becomes a planetary shooting gallery, its skies filled with colliding rocks. The cascading collisions would grind material into dust, which would rain down onto the planet in fiery showers. Mars, already fragile, would endure centuries of bombardment, not from the heavens, but from its own ruined satellites. Colonization plans would become not just dangerous, but suicidal. Imagine landing a habitat on the surface only to have it pelted weeks later by a hailstorm of moon fragments, each impact equivalent to a tactical nuke. No dome could withstand such punishment. No human settlement could survive under skies that fall endlessly, unpredictably, without reprieve. And what of the long-term implications? Orbital chaos does not resolve quickly. Once debris fields are established, they tend to persist, grinding themselves into finer and finer fragments, but never disappearing entirely. Earth space agencies already worry about the Kessler syndrome, the cascading collisions of satellites that could one day render low Earth orbit unusable. Now imagine that syndrome, not around a planet with thousands of satellites, but around Mars, triggered not by human carelessness, but by interstellar fate. Mars's orbit could become a graveyard of shattered moons, a region of space so dangerous that no spacecraft could safely traverse it. The irony would be unbearable. Humanity, having dreamed for centuries of reaching Mars, might be forced to watch helplessly as its orbital environment is transformed into an impenetrable wall of destruction. We would be left with telescopic images of a planet forever out of reach, our ambitions defeated not by technology, not by politics, but by the cold hand of orbital mechanics nudged by an alien comet. And yet, perhaps the darkest thought of all is this: orbital chaos does not stop at Mars. The debris ejected into heliocentric orbits could spread across the solar system, some fragments destined to wander inward toward Earth. What begins as a Martian disaster could, decades later, become a terrestrial threat. Small rocks seeded by Atlas might intersect Earth's orbit in the late 21st century, creating a rain of meteors larger and more dangerous than any shower we have seen. Some could burn up spectacularly in the atmosphere. Others could strike the oceans or cities, igniting fires and tidal waves. The disaster that began as Mars's problem would not remain isolated. Orbital chaos does not respect planetary boundaries. It spreads, it grows, it reshapes the very architecture of our solar system. If October 3rd becomes the day Mars's moons died, it may also become the day Earth's future was rewritten by a chain reaction of debris we cannot yet even imagine. It is tempting to treat Mars as a sacrificial shield, a distant sibling whose suffering spares us. When we imagine Atlas unleashing devastation upon the red planet, we comfort ourselves with distance, 140 million miles of empty space, a gulf wide enough that Earth seems immune. But this is an illusion. In the solar system, nothing happens in isolation. Every collision, every fragment, every plume of dust feeds into a gravitational dance whose ripples spread outward like shock waves in a pond. Mars is not an island. It is a stone in the same solar current that carries us all. And when Atlas brushes against it, the disturbance will not stop there. It will propagate, twisting trajectories, reshuffling debris, and perhaps in the cruelest irony, sending pieces of Mars and of Atlas itself on slow-burning courses that bring them home to Earth. Let us begin with the simplest scenario. Ejecta. If Atlas or its fragments strike Mars, the impact would hurl billions of tons of rock and dust into space. We know this happens because Earth has already collected the evidence. Dozens of meteorites in our museums, studied under microscopes and sliced into thin sections, are confirmed to be of Martian origin, rocks blasted into space by ancient impacts, later drifting across interplanetary space until they fell to Earth. One such meteorite, ALH 84001, even once carried the tantalizing hint of fossilized microbes, sparking decades of debate about life on Mars. If ordinary asteroid strikes can launch Martian debris all the way to Earth, what would an interstellar impact unleash? Atlas, moving at over 60 kilometers per second relative to Mars, carries orders of magnitude more kinetic energy than a typical asteroid. The ejecta from such a collision would not merely sprinkle Mars's orbit, it would be flung across the solar system in long looping trajectories, some of which would intersect Earth's orbit within decades or centuries. This means that an Atlas impact on Mars would not stay Martian. It would be exported, shards of alien contaminated rock falling through Earth's skies like fiery messengers of catastrophe. And these rocks would not be ordinary. They would be doubly alien, Martian crust contaminated with Atlas organics, fused in the blast with interstellar molecules never before seen in our solar system. Some fragments would arrive inert, harmless curiosities to be puzzled over by geologists. But others might carry active chemistry, catalytic compounds, self-replicating networks, or simply toxic molecules that Earth's biosphere has no defense against. Imagine a meteor shower in 2075, celebrated as a celestial spectacle, only for scientists to later realize that some of those glowing streaks were Trojan horses, seeds of Atlas riding fragments of Mars into Earth's oceans, fields, and cities. It would be contamination not by choice, but by gravitational inevitability, a cosmic chain reaction that began on Mars and ended in our forests, our crops, our bloodstreams. We would never see it coming. We would only know when it was too late. But contamination is not the only threat. Consider orbital perturbation, the way Atlas's mass and fragments could subtly reshape the pathways of other objects. Mars lies near the inner edge of the asteroid belt, and its gravity already helps shepherd countless small bodies in that region. A major disruption to Mars's orbital environment could scatter some of those asteroids, nudging them into resonant pathways with Jupiter or Earth. It would take only a few unlucky shifts to transform harmless belt dwellers into Earth-crossing hazards. Picture it, a dozen-kilometer scale asteroids, jostled by Atlas's chaos, slipping into orbits that bring them closer to Earth every year. Not tomorrow, not next decade, but a century from now. The slow inevitability of orbital mechanics means we might not recognize the danger until it is already locked in. Humanity would inherit not just a broken Mars, but a booby-trapped solar system, seeded with future impactors born of an interstellar disturbance we could not prevent. Even in the absence of direct impacts, the dust itself could become our problem. Atlas's coma is enormous, already stretching millions of kilometers, and if it fragments near Mars, much of that dust will be injected into heliocentric orbits. Unlike large rocks, dust does not fall predictably. It spirals slowly inward under the influence of Poynting-Robertson drag, a subtle effect of solar radiation that causes small particles to lose orbital energy over time. This means that the dust cloud seeded by Atlas could, over decades or centuries, drift inward toward Earth's orbit, creating dense meteor streams unlike any we have seen. Some might produce dazzling meteor showers, skies ablaze with hundreds of streaks per minute, but others could become lethal hazards to satellites, spacecraft, and astronauts. A single grain of dust moving at tens of kilometers per second can puncture spacecraft hulls, slice through solar panels, and disable electronics. Entire constellations of satellites could be lost, crippling our communication networks and GPS systems. The modern world, so utterly dependent on orbital infrastructure, could find itself blind and silent, not from a deliberate war, but from an alien dust cloud we accidentally inherited from Mars. And then comes the psychological dimension, perhaps the cruelest blow of all. Humanity has long dreamed of Mars as a backup, a plan B, the world we would flee to when Earth finally cracks under its own weight. The billionaire-funded visions of domes and terraforming projects, the sci-fi novels, the speeches about becoming a multi-planetary species, all of it depends on Mars being stable, usable, a platform for human expansion. If Atlas transforms Mars into a contaminated ruin, ringed by debris, haunted by storms, or worse, if fragments of that chaos begin falling back to Earth, then the dream itself dies. Mars would no longer be our salvation, but our curse. Every telescope pointed at it would remind us not of opportunity, but of failure, contamination, and looming threat. The very act of looking at Mars might one day feel like staring at the executioner's blade, waiting for the hammer of orbital mechanics to swing back in our direction. This is the chain reaction to Earth, not immediate annihilation, but slow dread. Rocks launched into space today fall into our oceans tomorrow. Dust seeded in Mars's orbit glitters in our skies a century later. Asteroids nudged by invisible gravitational whispers wander closer every year until one day they do not miss. And always, always, the contamination, chemistry from another star embedded in our soil, our water, our cells. In the end, Atlas's passage near Mars is not just Mars's problem, it is humanity's inheritance, a legacy of debris, contamination, and existential doubt that may take centuries to unfold, centuries to endure, and centuries to regret. For centuries, Mars has been more than a planet. It has been a mirror for human longing, a canvas for our fantasies of survival, conquest, and transcendence. The Red Planet has starred in pulp magazines and Hollywood blockbusters, in Elon Musk's TED Talks and NASA's most expensive PowerPoints. And it is the dream that we will not die on Earth, that our species will spread its wings and find a new frontier. But dreams, like planets, can be shattered. If 3I/Atlas unleashes its chaos on Mars, whether by impact, contamination, or orbital destruction, the consequences will not just scar rock and dust, they will scar the human imagination. They will unspool the story we have been telling ourselves for generations, that Mars is our backup plan, our inevitable second home. And once that story unravels, what is left? Only despair, cynicism, and the slow collapse of ambition on a planetary scale. Imagine the moment, October 2025. Atlas passes near Mars, and within days, telescopes record the unthinkable. A fragment collides with the planet, or with Phobos, creating a debris halo so dense that it reflects sunlight like a ghostly ring. Images from orbiters, if they survive long enough to transmit, show storms swallowing the surface, lightning arcing across dust-choked skies, or alien organics glinting in the regolith. The headlines are immediate. Mars no longer habitable candidate. Stock markets crash, not from the destruction itself, but from the collapse of confidence in the future. Companies that have built their brands on the promise of Martian colonization, SpaceX, Blue Origin, entire aerospace sectors, watch billions evaporate overnight. Politicians, who once invoked Mars as a symbol of hope and investment, pivot instantly, denouncing it as a graveyard, a trap, a distraction, and the public, always fickle, turns away in disgust. Within months, Mars shifts in the collective imagination from beacon to tombstone. Humanity loses not just a planet, but a purpose. The psychological blow cannot be overstated. Every civilization lives by its myths. Rome by conquest, Christendom by salvation, the Enlightenment by reason, America by frontier. For the 21st century, that myth was space, the idea that we were not bound to Earth's limits, that technology and willpower would carry us outward to new worlds. Mars was the keystone of that myth, the first step beyond the cradle. Remove it, and the entire arch of ambition collapses. What frontier remains? Venus, with its furnace heat? Europa, entombed under kilometers of ice? Titan, dark and distant, barely reachable, even with nuclear propulsion? None of these worlds carry the resonance of Mars, the planet that looks like Earth's twin through a telescope, the planet that has haunted our literature for 200 years. If Mars is lost, if Atlas rewrites it into a contaminated ruin or a death-shrouded fortress, then the dream itself dissolves. Humanity will turn inward, resigned to stagnation, convinced once again that the stars are not for us. And this collapse will not be abstract. It will manifest in budgets, policies, and lives. NASA's long-term plans for the 2030 CES and 2040 CES, crewed missions, sample returns, eventual colonies, will wither under political pressure. Legislators will ask, why spend trillions on a world rendered uninhabitable by an interstellar accident? Private investors will ask, what profit lies in mining or colonizing a planet encircled by debris and poisoned by alien chemistry? Universities will ask, why fund astrobiology departments when the very concept of life on Mars has been corrupted beyond meaning? The answers will all point to the same conclusion. Mars is over. And when Mars is over, the momentum of space exploration itself falters. Without the gravitational pull of that dream, humanity risks drifting back into parochialism, turning its energy toward short-term survival on Earth rather than long-term transcendence among the stars. The collapse of human ambition would not be loud, not explosive, but gradual, a slow suffocation of the very spirit that once reached for the moon. But perhaps the cruelest consequence will be cultural. Humans are storytellers, and when Mars is rewritten from salvation to curse, that story will haunt us. Artists, filmmakers, and writers will no longer depict domes under Martian skies, children playing in low gravity, or cities carved into canyons. They will depict storms, contamination, ruin. The very sight of Mars in the night sky will shift its meaning. What was once a symbol of hope, the next step, will become a symbol of futility, a reminder that the universe is hostile, that even our nearest neighbor can betray us. Generations will grow up, not dreaming of living on Mars, but fearing it, mocking it, dismissing it. Mars will become a warning label etched in the heavens, do not enter. And when the collective imagination turns away from a frontier, that frontier dies. No civilization has ever crossed a frontier it no longer believed in. Thus, the collapse of human ambition is not just about losing Mars. It is about losing the story of ourselves. Without Mars, the idea of becoming multiplanetary evaporates. Without that idea, our species loses the long-term vision that justifies sacrifice, invention, and unity. We become smaller, meaner, more provincial, trapped forever on Earth, not by physics, but by despair. And that, perhaps, is the greatest catastrophe Atlas could unleash. Not a crater, not a dust storm, but a silence. The silence of a species that no longer dares to dream beyond its own horizon. When civilizations lose their myths, they rarely collapse overnight. Instead, they enter periods of silence, stretches of history where ambition evaporates, where innovation stalls, where the will to look beyond the horizon is replaced by the dull rhythm of survival. Historians call them dark ages, not because all light vanishes, but because the flame of collective purpose flickers too low to illuminate the future. If Atlas scars Mars into a forbidden world, poisoned by alien contamination, ringed by lethal debris, its skies forever choking with dust storms, seeded by interstellar chaos, then humanity itself will enter such a silence, not because we lack the tools to reach for the stars, but because we no longer believe that reaching is worth the price. And belief, more than rockets, is the true engine of exploration. Consider the generational timeline. Children born in the 2030s, the very children once expected to walk on Mars, will instead grow up with the knowledge that Mars is lost. Their school books will describe the October 2025 encounter not as a milestone of progress, but as a cosmic warning, a case study in planetary fragility. Instead of posters of astronauts planting flags in Martian soil, classrooms will feature grim images of the Atlas impact craters, or the endless electromagnetic auroras flickering across ruined skies. These children will internalize a message more powerful than any lesson plan. The universe is not for you. It is hostile, unpredictable, waiting with traps you cannot anticipate. They will look at Mars through backyard telescopes and see not a future home, but a cautionary tale. And when a generation is raised to see the cosmos as a predator rather than a frontier, their ambitions wither before they are even born. The silence will extend far beyond education. Entire industries will wither in the shadow of Mars's curse. Aerospace budgets, already fragile, will shrink as governments pivot to immediate earthly crises, climate disasters, resource wars, economic instability. Why pour trillions into interplanetary dreams when the most achievable world has been poisoned by a passing ghost? Why build rockets for colonies that will never exist when cheaper drones and satellites can serve military and commercial needs? The infrastructure of space exploration, launch facilities, research labs, private investment pipelines will rust in place. Perhaps a handful of missions will limp along, robotic probes sent to asteroids or lunar bases built out of inertia. But the grand vision, cities on Mars, humanity as a multiplanetary species, will have died. And when visions die, so too does momentum. The silence will not roar, it will whisper, year after year, as each program quietly closes, each budget shrinks, each dream fades from policy documents into footnotes. Yet the silence will not be uniform. It will echo differently across cultures. In America, once the flagship of space exploration, Mars will become a symbol of betrayal, proof that human destiny cannot escape cosmic accident. The once revered names of Apollo and Artemis will be remembered as quaint relics of a naive age, when people believed they could leap from one world to another as easily as crossing an ocean. In China, where Mars colonization was seen as a tool of prestige and power, the loss will wound national pride, redirecting ambition toward earthly dominance rather than cosmic expansion. In Europe, where Mars represented cooperative science and discovery, the silence will manifest as resignation, a quiet turning inward to preserve knowledge while abandoning dreams. And in the developing world, where Mars was never a realistic goal, but always a symbol of shared human potential, the silence will be felt as betrayal, proof that the powerful squandered resources, chasing a doomed fantasy, while leaving Earth's real problems unsolved. But silence is not just political, it is cultural, spiritual. Humanity has always sought meaning in the sky, gods, prophecies, navigation, calendars. Mars has been a red beacon of war and hope since antiquity, its motions tracked by Babylonians, its symbolism woven into Roman mythology. What happens when that beacon becomes cursed? When its meaning shifts from destiny to doom? The long silence will carry into art, literature, and religion. New myths will arise, myths of cosmic betrayal, of hostile universes, of fallen futures. Some will call Atlas an omen, a punishment, a divine sign that humanity was arrogant to dream of the stars. Others will call it evidence of cosmic indifference, a cruel universe that does not care whether we rise or fall. Either way, the story will change, and in that story, Mars will no longer be a doorway. It will be a locked gate, rusting under an alien sky. The danger of silence is not only what it erases, but what it prevents. During the long silence, technologies that might have flourished, fusion propulsion, planetary defense systems, interstellar telescopes, will languish without funding or vision. The very tools that could protect us from the next Atlas will remain undeveloped because the last one convinced us that protection was pointless. Silence breeds vulnerability, just as Rome abandoned its roads and aqueducts, just as medieval Europe forgot Greek astronomy, so too will humanity risk forgetting how to look upward. And when the next interstellar wanderer approaches, as one inevitably will, we may not even have the will to notice, let alone the capacity to respond. That is the cruelest twist of the long silence. It prepares us not for resilience, but for the next catastrophe. And yet silence does not last forever. History teaches that dark ages end, often unexpectedly, when new myths, new ambitions, or new crises force civilizations to awaken. The question is not whether the long silence will end, but how. Will it end in renewed ambition, when a future generation dares once more to defy the cosmos? Or will it end in final collapse, when silence gives way not to rebirth, but to extinction? That is the question Atlas has planted in our timeline, like a seed of doubt. It is not the impact, the dust, the contamination that matters most. It is the silence that follows, and whether humanity will ever find the courage to break it. Warnings are not always written in language. Sometimes they are written in scars, in ruins, in catastrophes that echo across generations. If Atlas's encounter with Mars becomes the worst-case scenario, a fragmentation event, an impact, contamination, or even just the psychological collapse of the Martian dream, then the lesson may not be about Mars at all. It may be about us. It may be about the terrifying possibility that the universe itself is not indifferent, but instructive. That Atlas is not merely a rogue wanderer, but a cosmic warning, an interstellar message delivered not in symbols, but in consequences, a lesson written in orbital mechanics, dust storms, and silence. The stars are not safe, and those who reach for them must pay a price. Even if Atlas is not alive, even if no alien hand ever shaped its icy nucleus, its timing alone carries the weight of a warning. For billions of years, Mars has been battered by comets and asteroids, yet it is only in this century, the very century when humanity begins to prepare its first serious attempts at colonization, that an interstellar body approaches close enough to remind us of planetary fragility. This is no ordinary coincidence in the human mind. It feels scripted, as if the universe itself chose to test us at the exact moment when our ambition exceeded our capacity. The timing whispers a cruel lesson. Before you leap across the void, remember that the void can strike back. The more we interpret it, the more Atlas resembles not a random event, but a chapter in a larger cosmic dialogue, one in which humanity is a reluctant student. If this is a warning, what exactly is being taught? Perhaps it is the simplest lesson of all, that survival requires humility. For decades, our culture has treated Mars colonization as inevitable, as though planting flags and building domes were just a matter of engineering and money. Musk boasted of fleets of starships ferrying thousands. Thayer mapped out timelines for 2030. The public imagination was intoxicated by the idea that we could terraform a planet like remodeling a house. Atlas rips away that illusion. It reminds us that Mars is not a docile frontier waiting to be tamed. It is a fragile, unstable system, vulnerable to chaos from beyond the solar system. If the Martian dream collapses under the weight of Atlas's visit, then the warning is clear. The universe will not yield its secrets cheaply. To survive among the stars, we must master not only engineering, but vigilance, not only ambition, but caution. The warning is not just cosmic, it is moral. But there is a darker interpretation. What if Atlas is not a neutral warning, but an intentional one? Some researchers already whisper off the record, in conference halls and online forums, about the possibility of directed panspermia, the idea that interstellar bodies can be launched by advanced civilizations as probes, seeds, or even weapons. If Atlas carries exotic organics, if it contaminates Mars with chemistry incompatible with Earth life, then perhaps this is not an accident at all. Perhaps another civilization long ago realized that the surest way to prevent competitors from spreading across the stars was to send warnings disguised as wanderers, a kind of interstellar quarantine system, one that ensures fragile, emerging civilizations like ours never escape their home worlds. In this view, Atlas is not just a rock. It is a messenger with teeth, a subtle but devastating enforcement mechanism that keeps the galaxy's stage from becoming overcrowded. And the warning it carries is brutally simple. Stay home. Even if this theory is wrong, even if no alien intent lies behind Atlas, the symbolic power of the warning remains. Civilizations have always collapsed, not because of what happens to them, but because of how they interpret what happens. Rome saw omens in eclipses and plagues. Medieval Europe saw signs of divine wrath in comets. What will humanity see in Atlas? If we interpret it as proof that space is hostile, then we may retreat into centuries of silence, abandoning the stars to safer imaginations. If we interpret it as proof that we are not alone, that we have been warned by cosmic neighbors, then paranoia may consume us, a fear that every interstellar object is a spy, a weapon, a curse. Either way, the warning shapes our destiny. Either way, the silence deepens. The danger is not just in the rock itself, but in how we choose to read the message it brings. Perhaps the most terrifying part of this warning is its permanence. Impacts can heal, dust storms can fade, contamination can be studied, but the psychological scar of a cosmic warning endures for generations. Children born under this shadow will carry it with them into adulthood, shaping their politics, their religions, their art. A warning does not end when the event ends. It echoes, and Atlas's warning, whatever form it ultimately takes, could echo across centuries. Every time humanity dares to consider another frontier, Europa, Titan, Proxima Centauri, the ghost of Atlas will rise in our minds. We will ask, what if another warning waits there? What if the universe does not want us to expand? What if the stars themselves are hostile? This is the most insidious outcome. Not destruction, but hesitation. Not catastrophe, but paralysis. The universe does not need to kill us to defeat us. It only needs to convince us that moving forward is impossible. And Atlas, whether by accident or design, may have already begun that work. When a distant planet falls, the echoes always reach home. Mars is not just a neighbor in the night sky. It is a psychological anchor, a future humanity has already invested in emotionally, financially, and politically. If Atlas ruins Mars, Earth will feel the aftershocks, not through physical destruction, but through unraveling trust in the very idea of progress. The shadow of Mars's downfall will stretch across boardrooms, parliaments, and living rooms, whispering a single question. If Mars can be taken from us, what else can the universe strip away? This question will haunt every decision, every budget, every dream, until Earth itself begins to fracture under the weight of cosmic paranoia. The first tremor will strike the economy. Space has quietly become a trillion-dollar industry. Satellites power the internet. GPS guides commerce. Asteroid mining companies trade speculative futures, and mega constellations promise permanent connectivity. All of it rests on the illusion of stability, that orbits remain predictable, that planetary targets remain viable, that investment in cosmic infrastructure will pay off. Atlas shatters this illusion. If Mars is transformed into a hazardous graveyard, private investors will panic. Stock prices of aerospace giants will crater. Startups will collapse overnight. Insurance markets, already strained by climate disasters, will refuse to underwrite space ventures at all, declaring cosmic risk unquantifiable. The ripple spreads. Communications networks reliant on satellites become vulnerable as governments cut funding for orbital defense. Shipping companies lose GPS stability during geomagnetic disturbances. Financial systems crash under cascading disruptions. In the space of a decade, the global economy could regress by half a century, undone not by war or plague, but by a rock from another star. The shadow will grow darker in politics. Mars has been a rare unifying narrative in a fractured world, the one dream that transcended borders, where Americans, Chinese, Europeans, and private corporations competed fiercely but shared a common goal. When that goal collapses, competition does not vanish. It metastasizes into suspicion. Why, some governments will ask, did NASA not prevent the disaster? Why did ESA stay quiet about early anomalies? Why did China's observatories release contradictory data about Atlas's emissions? Conspiracy theories, once fringe, will explode into mainstream policy. Nations will accuse one another of hiding the truth about Atlas, of weaponizing interstellar threats, of testing alien technology. The United Nations will splinter under pressure, space treaties will collapse, and instead of working together on planetary defense, nations will hoard technology in fear that their rivals know more than they do. Atlas will not just scar Mars, it will fracture Earth's fragile global order, leaving us more vulnerable than ever to the next celestial visitor. But the deepest shadow will fall on culture itself. Humanity thrives on the idea of destiny. For generations, the space age has been our mythology, our proof that progress is inevitable. The moon landing in 1969 became the symbol of human possibility. Mars was meant to be its sequel. When that sequel is canceled by cosmic accident, the cultural wound will be profound. Writers will abandon the genre of optimistic science fiction. Films will depict space not as frontier, but as nightmare. Religions will claim vindication. Some will argue that Atlas proves the universe is hostile to human arrogance. Others will see it as divine punishment for daring to leave Earth. Movements will rise urging humanity to reject space entirely, to turn inward, to embrace Earth as a prison rather than a cradle. These movements will not be small. They will shape elections, rewrite constitutions, topple governments. Humanity's cultural compass will spin wildly, with no true north to guide it. And in this confusion, silence will spread. Universities will defund astrophysics departments, calling them luxuries. Planetary defense initiatives will languish without support. Young scientists will choose safer careers in climate engineering or biotech, leaving the cosmos to amateurs. The night sky will remain above us, stars glittering as always, but few will look up. Children will not dream of being astronauts, but survivalists. The idea of space will become toxic, associated not with adventure, but with futility, paranoia, and loss. The stars will still shine, but their meaning will be gone. And that, perhaps, is the greatest shadow of all. A civilization that forgets how to look beyond its own atmosphere is a civilization already in decline. History is not only a record of events, but of the scars those events carve into culture. A war can last 5 years and still dictate foreign policy for 50. A famine can starve one generation and still haunt the children of the survivors with inherited fear. When Atlas crosses paths with Mars, its damage will not be measured in craters or dust clouds, but in the way it imprints itself into the collective psyche of humanity. For centuries, the name Mars has symbolized possibility. After Atlas, it may symbolize betrayal, and symbols, once corrupted, have the power to chain generations to stories of fear they never lived but will never escape. Imagine the children of 2035. They were meant to be the Mars generation, the sons and daughters who would grow up with posters of domes and rockets and watch their parents train for colonization. Instead, their classrooms will display the images of failure, dead orbiters, global dust veils, and the unblinking eye of a cursed red planet. They will learn the story not as one of ambition, but as a cautionary tale. We tried to reach beyond Earth, and the cosmos punished us. These children will grow up with a reflexive skepticism toward space programs. When they enter politics, they will vote against exploration. When they run companies, they will dismiss investment in space as vanity. When they raise their own children, they will pass down the same stories of futility. Thus begins the generational curse, not the death of ambition in one moment, but the systematic inheritance of despair. The curse will not be uniform, it will mutate across societies. In wealthy nations, Mars will become a symbol of wasted money. Populist movements will rally voters with slogans like "Fix Earth First" or "No More Dead Planets." Science budgets will be gutted in favor of immediate survival technologies, desalination, geoengineering, militarized AI. In poorer nations, the curse will take a darker form, resentment. They will remember how the rich once promised to take humanity to Mars, only for that dream to implode in dust and debris. For them, Atlas will not just mark the death of ambition, but the revelation of a lie, proof that the promises of space were only ever myths of the powerful. This resentment will widen the fractures of global inequality, fueling revolutions, wars, and movements that reject not only Mars, but the very idea of shared human destiny. Over time, the curse will harden into mythology. Mars will enter folklore not as a frontier, but as a forbidden place. Religious groups may declare it cursed, a realm set aside by God as uninhabitable for human pride. Conspiracy cultures will flourish, spreading tales that Atlas was not a comet, but an alien weapon, proof that the galaxy itself enforces boundaries. Artists will render Mars not as a city under glass, but as a hellscape, haunted by lightning storms and spectral rings of debris. In this way, the curse embeds itself not only in policy, but in the subconscious of civilization. The night sky will no longer inspire awe, it will trigger unease. Mars will become a symbol of futility, the way Icarus once symbolized hubris, a permanent reminder that those who fly too high will fall. And the tragedy of the generational curse is that it ensures paralysis long after the danger has passed. Suppose Atlas departs quietly into interstellar space, leaving Mars a scarred but stable world. Suppose decades later, the dust settles, the orbit clears, the contamination proves less catastrophic than feared. By then, it will not matter. The curse will already be carved into the hearts of those who grew up in its shadow. They will not see opportunity, they will see ghosts. They will not ask, how can we return to Mars? They will ask, why risk another catastrophe? The window of ambition, once closed for a generation, may remain closed for centuries. Thus, Atlas ensures victory, not through destruction, but through delay, robbing humanity of the momentum required to survive in a hostile galaxy. And in that delay, other cosmic threats will have their chance to strike a species too afraid to rise. When knowledge falters, myth rushes in to fill the vacuum. Civilizations that cannot explain their catastrophes invent stories to survive them. After Atlas, humanity will not be content with silence. We will demand meaning, and in that demand, superstition will bloom like mold in the cracks of reason. The object itself, catalogued as 3I/Atlas, plotted on star charts, dissected by telescopes, will slip from the realm of science into the realm of legend. And once legend takes hold, truth becomes irrelevant. The encounter with Mars will be rewritten not as orbital mechanics and cosmic chance, but as divine punishment, alien judgment, or a curse baked into the architecture of the universe. Atlas will no longer be a comet, it will be a story, and stories are far harder to dispel than dust clouds. The first seeds of superstition will be sown in religion. Across the world, sects will rise proclaiming Atlas as proof that humanity is not meant to leave Earth. Fundamentalist preachers will thunder from pulpits that the October 2025 encounter was a warning from God, a flaming sword guarding the gates of Eden. New religions will sprout, worshipping Atlas as a cosmic messenger. They will craft rituals around its trajectory, its coma, its strange carbon dioxide emissions, claiming to read prophecies in its flare-ups. In the Middle East, Mars may be rebranded as the forbidden planet in sermons, while in the West, Atlas cults will gather around live streams of telescopes, treating each observation as sacred revelation. Billions of people searching for order in chaos will find it not in science, but in superstition, reshaping global faith for centuries to come. Meanwhile, politics will weaponize the myths. Leaders desperate to consolidate power will lean into Atlas as a symbol. One faction may declare that Mars is cursed, using it to slash scientific budgets and redirect resources toward authoritarian control. Another may insist Atlas was an alien warning and that only military expansion can prepare Earth for contact. Propaganda will use Atlas imagery, the blazing tail, the blood-red reflection in Martian skies, to justify everything from censorship to war. Conspiracy theorists will thrive, weaving tales of governments hiding the true message embedded in Atlas's orbit. They will claim NASA intercepted signals in its emissions, that ESA destroyed data, that China cracked a code no one else admits exists. These conspiracies, amplified by social media algorithms that favor rage over reason, will fracture society further. Truth will not matter. What matters is which superstition grants control. But the most insidious growth of superstition will be cultural. Art, literature, and film will no longer depict humanity as pioneers of the cosmos, but as trespassers. The red planet will haunt stories as a cursed land, a graveyard of ambitions, a place where explorers go mad or vanish. Children's books will feature Atlas as a bogeyman, the star wanderer who punishes those who look up too long. Musicians will sing of it in apocalyptic hymns. Poets will liken its icy heart to humanity's hubris. Slowly, the framework of progress that once defined modernity will rot, replaced by a worldview where every scientific endeavor is suspect, every launch a potential curse, every cosmic anomaly a bad omen. The Enlightenment itself will be in retreat, undone not by ignorance, but by trauma wrapped in narrative. And yet superstition is sticky because it provides what science often cannot: comfort. If Atlas was chance, then the universe is hostile, indifferent, and unsafe. But if Atlas was a curse, then at least it has meaning. At least someone, God, aliens, fate, is in control. The danger of the era of superstition is not only that it rewrites the past, but that it dictates the future. Entire generations raised under its myths will resist any attempt to reignite space exploration. Politicians who propose new missions will be branded heretics. Engineers who design rockets will be accused of awakening the curse again. And slowly, the collective muscle of science, the labs, the universities, the global networks of data, will atrophy, replaced by rituals, sermons, and fear. Atlas will have achieved what no asteroid could, not the destruction of our planet, but the destruction of our reason. Every dark age preserves a remnant, a sliver of light, carried forward by those who refuse to let knowledge die. During Europe's medieval silence, monks copied ancient texts by candlelight, preserving scraps of Aristotle and Plato. In Baghdad's House of Wisdom, scholars translated Greek into Arabic, saving geometry and medicine, while empires burned. If Atlas plunges humanity into a new age of superstition, the same pattern will repeat. The masses will turn their eyes from the sky, governments will shut observatories, and superstition will strangle science. Yet a few will persist. The last astronomers, men and women who cannot stop looking upward, even when doing so marks them as heretics, will remain at their telescopes, their data servers, their secret radio arrays, keeping watch over a universe everyone else has chosen to fear. They will live double lives. And by day, they will blend into the culture of superstition, professors teaching approved courses in weather studies, engineers working quietly in renewable energy, coders hiding their celestial simulations inside climate models. By night, they will gather in basements and mountaintop huts, booting up equipment scavenged from defunded labs. Their telescopes will be patched together from old satellites, their detectors jury-rigged from scavenged cameras, their computers running on black market processors. They will whisper across encrypted networks, sharing data on orbital paths, plasma emissions, and dust streams. They will know the risks, governments cracking down on Atlas denialism, mobs vandalizing observatories, priests denouncing them as summoners of the curse. Yet still they will watch, because the sky cannot be ignored. And in their exile, they will become something both fragile and precious, the keepers of continuity between reason and fear. The tragedy is that their warnings will fall on deaf ears. Imagine a cluster of these astronomers in 2060, huddled in an underground bunker in Chile, analyzing data from a hidden telescope they've kept aligned for decades. They discover that fragments of Atlas ejecta, long predicted but dismissed as myth, are drifting inward toward Earth's orbit. They calculate trajectories showing possible impacts within a generation. They send reports to governments, to universities, to anyone who will listen. But the era of superstition has calcified. Leaders dismiss them as fearmongers. Religious groups denounce them as blasphemers, trying to resurrect the curse. Conspiracy networks mock them as pawns of foreign powers. Their charts, their equations, their desperate appeals vanish into silence. Humanity, addicted to its myths, chooses ignorance over vigilance. And so the astronomers watch alone, knowing what is coming, powerless to stop it. Over time, they will become legends themselves. Stories will circulate of hidden stargazers, secret societies who dare to look where others refuse. Some will call them saints, keepers of forbidden truth. Others will call them witches, dangerous fools, summoning cosmic wrath. In either case, they will be pushed further into secrecy, preserving their observations in hidden archives, encoded in ways that only the initiated can decipher. Entire generations may pass without their voices ever reaching the mainstream, yet still they will persist, because the stars do not go away, simply because humanity chooses not to see them. And in their quiet devotion lies the last hope of recovery, the fragile thread of knowledge that could one day be pulled back into the light. Yet the burden will break many of them. To watch the skies while everyone else looks down is to carry unbearable loneliness. Some astronomers will give up, surrendering to the tide of superstition. Others will go mad, convinced that Atlas is still watching, that every flicker of light is a hidden message. A few will die for their persistence, martyrs to a truth no one else wants. But enough will survive. Enough will pass on their telescopes and data to apprentices. Enough will hide their archives in caves, satellites, or encrypted quantum networks. Like seeds buried in frozen soil, their knowledge will wait, dormant but not dead, until the cultural climate shifts. The last astronomers will not save their own time. They will save the possibility of another time, a future in which reason can bloom again. It does not announce itself with thunder. It arrives as a series of tiny corrections in ephemerides, discrepancies so small they look like rounding errors to the machines that still run what remains of the sky, a faint thickening of the zodiacal light over southern latitudes. A handful of hypervelocity micropits spidering across the quartz windows of weather satellites that were never meant to taste interstellar dust. The last astronomers see it first because they have trained their eyes to live inside residuals and noise. Their hidden arrays, repurposed meteor radars married to salvaged LiDAR, stitched into a mesh by contraband FPGAs, begin reporting elevations in trail persistence and ablation onset heights that do not map to any known shower. The spectra tell a harsher truth, emission lines fat with carbonyls and nitriles, a signature the old archives label Atlas-like in trembling annotations. Pointing. Robertson drag has done its patient work. What Mars could not hold, the sun has been reeling inward grain by poisonous grain. Across the equinox, the first coherent stream hits the night side of the Pacific like glass rain from another star. It is beautiful in the way all ruin is beautiful from far enough away, an aural gauze of hypersonic streaks whispering themselves to plasma in the upper air, until airliners are diverted, until the ionosphere folds like wet cloth, until 10,000 GPS receivers forget where the ground is. The cascade begins with trivia, as all civilizational collapses do. A polar broadband constellation, loses 4 nodes to impacts too small to register on human fear. Routers reroute, and the market blinks but does not break. A coastal nation postpones a launch because radar returns look snowy. Agriculture satellites cough in quiet. An entire continent mistimes its irrigation cycle by hours, and that is enough to shave yield off the margins of a hungry year. Insurance desks, already feral from climate arithmetic, redraw exclusions in fonts so small they might as well be scripture, unforeseeable interstellar precipitate. Then, inevitability grows teeth. A tumbling weather platform in sun-synchronous orbit takes a millimeter-wide shard at 15 kilometers per sets. The impact plume seeds a fan of glittering shrapnel that metastasizes into a kill plane. Space situational awareness, with half its telescopes shuttered under the era of superstition, cannot compute the new density fast enough to warn the other birds. In a week, 3 more scatter. In a month, the first major nation loses persistent weather coverage. Typhoon landfalls revert to guesswork and prayer. The press, which long ago traded literacy for virality, finally catches the scent and names it the Atlas Fall. The name is wrong. This is not the comet, only its after echo, but names are spells, and the spell works. Markets do what markets always do when they meet unpriceable risk. They panic, then freeze. From bunkers and barns and borrowed labs, the last astronomers raise their flags. They publish a sky map stitched from 1,000 illegal sensors, a cartography of incoming filaments braided by resonance and shepherded by the minor planets like cattle through invisible gates. They trace the main stream to a node that will intersect Earth's orbit for 9 consecutive years, with outliers fanning into the decades beyond. They do not say apocalypse. They say maintenance windows, cross-section hardening, constellation choreography, urgent debris remediation. But their cautionary grammar cannot compete with fear's poetry. Governments hear only one sentence: Atlas has returned. Ministries that outlawed the very telescopes that made the forecast quietly requisition the results and classify them, then denounce the forecasters as hoaxers to maintain theological symmetry. It is an old trick, older than printing. Take the candle, blame the hand. In the noise, a different apparatus awakens. Defense ministries rediscover the shelved white papers on hypervelocity sandblasting as a weapon class. Someone in orbit proves the concept by accident or design when a military imaging platform shreds in a trail whose parent body cannot be identified. Borders harden in the sky the way they once hardened on land. No one admits it, but the doctrine is simple. If the heavens are a minefield, own the mines. The first macroscopic visitor arrives in local noon, a drumroll that never finds a symbol. An object only 20 meters across, no larger than a house, but massed like a cathedral, skips off the atmosphere over the South Atlantic and explodes at 30 kilometers with the candela of an angry dawn. The shock front circles the world twice. Windows die in 6 cities. Fish die by the million, where the pressure wave tricks the sea into thinking it has forgotten how to carry sound. The chemistry it rains is stranger. Across 3 countries, sensors report transient spikes in odd organics that look like the photocopies of life. Not amino acids, but their feral cousins. Not lipids, but things that want to be membranes when someone teaches them how to dream. The era of superstition inhales and declares fulfillment. The curse is awake, the wanderer remembers. Churches fill, markets empty, and the air between them hums with a question that once would have funded laboratories and now funds militias. Who brought this upon us? In hidden channels, the last astronomers do the math they have always done. They show how weak Yarkovsky thrust, absorbed across black carbon-rich pebbles, has walked fragments sunward into resonances that braid disaster with calendar. They plot the next 9 peak encounters, put confidence intervals around blast altitudes, sketch the latitude belts that will glow. They send it all to anyone still willing to read, and for a brief lucid hour, the species remembers how to be a republic of letters. Engineers call engineers, controllers move satellites, power grids pivot to islanding. Commercial outfits with 1 foot left in courage launch disposable radar cubes to paint the streams in real time. It works imperfectly, expensively, gloriously for 3 weeks. Then the sky breaks in a way no model had the syntax to imagine. A cluster of mesoscale bodies, call them boulders, call them the seeds of a lost moon, arrives phase-locked like a flock. They are not big enough to see at distance, not small enough to die politely. They thread the thermosphere like needles and shed, their ablative skins writing luminous algebra across continents. One dies where the atmosphere is thick, and a desert becomes glass for 20 kilometers in every direction. One dies where the air is thin, and its remnant core kisses an alpine valley at Mach 30. The mountain exhales down slope as a pyroclastic hurricane, and a capital city learns what suffocation feels like at speed. One does not die, not properly. It punches the ocean, coughs steam to the mesosphere, and leaves behind a wave that rows outward in rings until they discover coasts that built their risk models on a century of gentle arithmetic. None of this ends the world, but all of it ends the calendar by which the world pretended to be predictable. Insurance law becomes mythology overnight. Shipping lanes redraw themselves around rumor. The climate models, laboring under aerosols they did not order, begin to speak in subjunctive mood. And over it all, like a diagnosis whispered in a crowded ward, comes the quiet confirmation from the last astronomers, clandestine spectrometers. The isotopes don't lie. The dust is Atlas-born. This is the hinge where prophecy becomes maintenance, where myth either graduates into engineering or eats its children. In a saner century, the species would have convened a council and named the work Rebuild the Sky. Repoint shipyards to throw up sacrificial foils and Whipple shields. Lay down a factory floor of cheap disposable scoutcraft whose only mission is to die informatively. Spin up the old playbooks for kinetic deflection and laser ablation. Not against planet killers, but against swarms. Salt the stratosphere with tracers that teach the atmosphere to tell us when it is wounded. Some of that happens anyway, in pockets where courage is local and budgets are temporary. A coalition of mid-sized nations, tired of being footnotes to imperial panic, funds a meteorological fleet that is meteorological only in the root sense, a flotilla of CubeSats and balloon-borne spectrographs mapping the weather of falling stones. In coastal megacities, neighborhood cooperatives install early warning microphones tuned to infrasound, 1,000 cheap ears where one expensive eye would have been before fear closed the observatories. The last astronomers become civil engineers by stealth, smuggling orbital mechanics into building codes and plasma physics into hospital surge plans. It is not heroism, it is triage. But triage is how species live long enough to remember what flourishing felt like. The era of superstition does not yield simply because reality insists. Preachers learn new hymns that accommodate sirens. Politicians discover that panic polishes every speech. Yet the sky's pedagogy is patient and precise. Each stream that arrives exactly when the hidden ephemerides promised, each blackout that ends at the hour a backroom dashboard forecast, each saved satellite, each evacuated coastline chips at the idea that ignorance is safety. Children who were taught that looking up invites the curse are marched into gymnasiums when the sirens sound, and they survive because someone stared at residuals in a basement and refused to blink. A habit is born. Habits are how civilizations shed skins. And somewhere under a mountain, where the server racks hum like hives, the last astronomers risk a larger sentence than any they have dared write since October 2025. The main Atlas node peaks in 7 years. The streams decay after 9. The heavy bodies will be largely spent in 12 if we can keep the sky navigable. It is not salvation, it is a timetable. But timetables are the scaffolds hope climbs. When the night finally clears for a week, the planet discovers that stars still exist. They look unchanged, which is their oldest trick and our oldest comfort. Mars gleams there too, smaller now in the human story, but stubbornly present, a coin of rust caught in the river of the ecliptic. The wanderer that cursed it is long past perihelion, a fading ember on a trajectory that arithmetic could follow out to the dark between suns. It will not return on any calendar that matters to the things that breathe. But its children have, and for a while longer, will. The lesson is not closure, it is continuity. A civilization learns the difference between being spared and being ready, and the last astronomers, no longer the last because apprentices have multiplied in the wake of sirens, step out of their basements into daylight, and with a caution born of scar tissue, begin to argue for something that once was called a future. Not the old fantasy of cities under red skies tomorrow, but a disciplined vow to harden low Earth orbit, to give every coast a voice that can hear the ocean think, to fund the drab, unglamorous mathematics that keeps calendars honest, to build at last a planetary defense that measures success in nothing happening. The wanderer returned. We are still here. The rest is maintenance and memory, and the choice, renewed each morning, to look up anyway. Every civilization has its soundtrack. For some it was the clash of bronze on shields, for others the bells of cathedrals or the smoke-belching whistles of steam. For ours, in the aftermath of Atlas, it becomes the siren. Not the romanticized call of Homer's singers, but the rising mechanical wail that drills through concrete, warning of skies that may at any moment spit fire. By the late 21st century, the siren has replaced the calendar as humanity's true metronome. Birthdays are forgotten, but every child can count the intervals between the last dustfall and the next projected swarm. The siren is not just a tool, it is culture. It decides when schools close, when markets halt, when harvests are delayed. In every city, drills are rehearsed with a devotion once reserved for religious ritual. Humanity has become a species that no longer orients itself by seasons or stars, but by the cadence of alarms. The irony is suffocating. We dreamed of Mars as our salvation, yet we have built a civilization patterned after siege. Every roof is double-layered with sacrificial foils. Every port hides bunkers carved into bedrock. Every satellite launched is assumed expendable before it leaves the pad. What was once called space exploration is now sky maintenance, a grim custodial labor to keep the heavens from swallowing us whole. Children grow up learning evacuation routes, the way their ancestors learned nursery rhymes. Farmers plant in staggered grids so that when a fragment hits, not all the crop is lost at once. Even religion bends to the siren. Sermons are timed to conclude before the next scheduled alert. In some sects, the siren itself has been canonized, treated as the voice of God reminding humanity of its limits. Faith and fear entwine until they are indistinguishable, until the act of survival feels like liturgy. But sirens carry another, unintended lesson. Rhythm. With each alarm, each evacuation, each false positive where the sky does not fall, humanity begins to notice something. We are still here. The ground still bears us. The stars still shine after the storm. Survival, repeated enough, breeds resilience. Entire professions rise devoted to prediction, not exploration. Analysts, forecasters, computational monks who spend their lives tuning the cadence of sirens until it maps perfectly to the rhythms of dust and stone. In this way, the siren becomes not just a warning, but a covenant. If we listen carefully enough, we can live. Civilization reshapes itself around this grim promise. Cities shrink and harden. Megastructures dissolve into distributed settlements. Trade routes shift underground and underwater. Humanity does not conquer the cosmos, but neither does it surrender. It survives by choreography, by dancing to the siren's song, yet beneath the routine beats a deeper unease. To live by sirens is to live in expectation of failure. One missed alarm, one fragment too small to track, one government that silences its alerts for political expedience, and the rhythm shatters into catastrophe. People learn to dream lightly, to plan cautiously, to avoid futures longer than the next predicted swarm. Art becomes claustrophobic, filled with imagery of bunkers, shelters, and watchful skies. Children draw not stars but sirens. And in this narrowing of imagination lies the true cost of Atlas. Not that it shattered Mars, not that it poisoned orbits, but that it rewrote our relationship with the future itself. Where once we looked up with wonder, now we look up with dread. Where once we planned for centuries, now we plan for sirens. Humanity remains alive, but it is an aliveness stripped of ambition, compressed into survival cycles that leave little room for transcendence. The age of sirens is not apocalypse, but something colder, the indefinite postponement of everything we once meant by progress. Every civilization eventually rewrites its failures into myth. Troy was once a smoldering ruin, now it lives as legend. The Library of Alexandria was once just a building, now it is a metaphor for every loss of knowledge. So too with Mars. Once the target of rovers, rockets, and billion-dollar manifestos, it now drifts in the human imagination as something different, a scar, a curse, a caution etched into the heavens. The red dot that once represented humanity's boldest dream becomes the shorthand for our deepest fear. We do not say reach for Mars anymore, we say remember Mars. The phrase becomes a proverb, whispered across generations like a warning against hubris. Every culture interprets it differently, but all agree Atlas turned Mars from a destination into a myth. In some cultures, Mars becomes a tomb. The global south, embittered by promises of colonization that collapsed into dust storms and alien contamination, begins to tell stories of ancestors buried on the red planet, even though no human ever set foot there. In these tales, Mars is not a place of escape, but of exile, where the greedy and arrogant were struck down for daring to leave Earth. Parents warn their children that to look at Mars too long is to invite misfortune, as if the planet itself carries a gaze that burns ambition into ash. In other regions, Mars becomes a trickster, the planet that lured humanity with false promise, only to betray it at the very moment of approach. Myths cast it as a cosmic deceiver, a mirage that punishes those who mistake dream for destiny. Every eclipse of Mars into Earth's night sky renews the story. The deceiver is still watching, still waiting. Religions adapt too. In Christianity, Mars is folded into eschatology. The planet becomes a symbol of temptation, the second Eden humanity was never meant to grasp. In Islam, scholars reinterpret old prophecies to suggest Mars's ruin was written long before telescopes. In Hindu cosmology, where Mars was always associated with war, Mangala, Atlas becomes proof that cosmic violence rules the universe's rhythms. And in new religions born after Atlas, Mars is canonized outright as the forbidden world, the terra incognita of the soul. Some sects worship it as a wrathful deity, others as a martyr planet struck down by an interstellar invader. In either case, the myth metastasizes into ritual. Prayers at its rising, fasts at its opposition, sermons on its blood-red glow. Where science once dissected Mars with spectrometers, faith now appropriates it with allegory. Art follows faith. The space operas of the 20th and 21st centuries, domes on Olympus Mons, fleets sailing between Phobos and Deimos, give way to darker visions. Painters depict Mars as a bleeding wound in the sky. Poets call it the eternal no. Filmmakers craft horror epics in which expeditions to Mars awaken the curse of Atlas, their crews swallowed by dust storms and spectral auroras. Even music changes. Folk songs across cultures adopt Mars as metaphor for betrayal, the unreachable lover who promised much and delivered nothing. The planet becomes a canvas for every human failure, greed, hubris, denial. Where once we projected our hopes onto its rusted plains, we now project our fears. The myth of Mars becomes universal, not because it is true, but because it is useful. It explains our suffering, it warns against ambition, it anchors us in superstition. And yet myths are never static. They evolve, and sometimes they rebel against themselves. By the late 22nd century, a countercurrent stirs. A generation raised entirely under the age of sirens begins to reinterpret the Martian myth, not as curse but as challenge. To them Mars is no longer a deceiver, but a trial, a mountain that killed climbers, yet still stands to be climbed. They whisper, what if the curse is not real? What if the myth was written only to keep us afraid? The last astronomers, or their heirs, feed this whisper by smuggling data, charts, simulations, isotopic fingerprints into schools and underground networks. They remind the young that Mars is still there, scarred but not destroyed, waiting, and slowly, dangerously, the myth fractures. For the first time in generations, Mars begins to shimmer again as possibility. Not yet as a plan, not yet as policy, but as rumor, as forbidden dream. The myth does not die, it mutates, and that mutation may one day reopen the path Atlas tried to close. Dreams once outlawed grow sharper in secret. By the 22nd century, Mars has become less a planet and more a taboo, a cosmic scar. Humanity is forbidden to touch, yet beneath the sirens, beneath the myths, beneath the state-enforced silence, something stirs. A generation raised entirely under fear begins to ask the unthinkable. What if the curse was never real? Their grandparents heard sermons that Mars was poisoned forever. Their parents were taught that Atlas was a divine warning, but they live with a new reality, survival. They have seen the sirens wail and stop, the dust fall and settle, the meteor storms come and go without ending the world. Survival is no longer terror, it is routine, and routine breeds skepticism. If humanity can outlast the fallout of Atlas's fragments, can it not outlast the myth itself? Thus begins the Forbidden Dream, a movement not of governments or corporations, but of restless young minds who dare to imagine Mars not as cursed tomb, but as future again. At first, it is nothing more than whispers in encrypted chat rooms, fragments of art passed hand to hand, an old NASA blueprint smuggled from a forgotten archive, a simulation of Martian terrain rendered not as graveyard, but as fertile grid, music that swaps the siren's rising wail for the imagined hum of rockets. These are dangerous acts. Governments that enforce superstition treat them as sedition. Preachers call them heresy. In some nations, possession of Mars imagery becomes punishable by imprisonment. Yet, repression only feeds the hunger. Underground schools form where children are secretly taught orbital mechanics, Martian geology, the biology of survival domes. They do so by candlelight or stolen solar power, their textbooks encrypted inside banal climate files. The dream becomes not just forbidden, but intoxicating. To speak of Mars is to rebel, to resist, to refuse the story handed down by a traumatized world. The movement's first great rupture comes when one of these underground cells manages to seize control of a decommissioned launch silo. The silo, relic of an abandoned planetary defense initiative, still has fuel, hardware, and most importantly, forgotten access codes. Against every regulation, against every myth, they launch a signal buoy into heliocentric orbit. Its payload is nothing more than a digital mural, images of Mars before Atlas, stitched together from old telescopes, rendered in impossible clarity. For weeks it broadcasts back to Earth, bouncing across pirate satellites, infiltrating every corner of the world's data networks. Billions see it, Mars not as cursed, not as bleeding wound, but as it was once promised, rusted plains under a pale pink sky, waiting. The world convulses. Authorities scramble to jam the signal, but the image has already seeded itself across 1 million devices. For the first time in generations, Mars gleams not as omen, but as invitation. The backlash is ferocious. Governments denounce the launch as terrorism. Religious authorities call it blasphemy. Propaganda insists the image is fake, digitally fabricated by cultists to lure humanity back into temptation. Arrests follow. Trials are staged. Executions are whispered. Yet the damage is irreversible. The forbidden dream has breached the surface. Protests erupt in cities where sirens once commanded silence. Young people march with red flags painted as Mars, chanting not prayers of fear, but slogans of defiance. Mars is not cursed. Mars is ours. The slogans spread faster than suppression can contain them. Even in bastions of superstition, cracks appear. Parents who once forbade their children from looking up now secretly encourage their curiosity. Soldiers ordered to break up marches hesitate, remembering their own childhood doubts. The myth of Mars as curse has met its first true rival, the myth of Mars as stolen future. But rebellion is never without risk. The same orbital debris that made Mars unreachable still prowls the heavens, and the infrastructure for safe passage is decades gone. Even if humanity dared to reclaim the dream, the path would be fraught with danger. Yet the forbidden dream does not shrink from danger, it feeds on it. For its followers, the very impossibility of Mars makes it sacred. To die reaching for it would be victory enough, because it would prove that fear is not eternal. Slowly, dangerously, plans emerge. Blueprints for modular spacecraft, pieced together from surviving orbital industries. proposals for habitats buried deep beneath regolith to shield against radiation and dust, smuggled archives of old terraforming simulations, updated with the lessons of Atlas. The dream becomes less abstract, more tangible, and with tangibility comes inevitability. The world that once swore never again begins, against its own myth, to prepare again. It begins with a single word scrawled across encrypted networks, whispered in pirate frequencies, etched onto walls under cover of night. Atlas. Not as curse, not as ghost, but as challenge. For the generation raised under the sirens, the comet is no longer a divine prohibition. It is a wound to be answered. They see 3I/Atlas, not as an omen to avoid, but as the first interstellar trespass that taught humanity what fear does when left unchecked. To them, Atlas is unfinished business. Its fragments still orbit in slow decay around Mars, shards of interstellar ice glinting like teeth in the night sky, a reminder of humanity's retreat. And so the forbidden dreamers declare, if the curse came from Atlas, then to Mars they must go, not despite it, but because of it. Their logic is heretical, but it burns with ruthless clarity. The worst case was already lived. Humanity abandoned Mars, erased it from its maps, and bent its cultures into superstition. Entire economies collapsed as industries built for colonization withered under prohibition. For the dreamers, that is the real apocalypse, not an impact crater, not a poisoned sky, but the annihilation of courage. To reclaim Mars, they argue, is to reclaim humanity itself, and they know the cost. Every piece of surviving data about Atlas's trajectory, its chemical anomalies, its unpredictable fragmentation, is studied not with dread, but with reverence. They map the debris swarms as others map constellations. They track the CO2 trails of Atlas's coma through old ESA archives. They build simulation after simulation of fragment strikes on Martian terrain, and instead of shuddering, they whisper, "We can endure this." The first heretical mission is nothing more than an improvised capsule stitched together from smuggled modules, retrofitted boosters, and the scavenged remains of what once was planetary defense infrastructure. Its name is Sybil, chosen deliberately, not as prophet of doom, but as the voice that speaks truth against tyranny. Sybil is not meant to succeed. Everyone knows it. Its shielding is incomplete. Its course is suicidal. Its life support barely functional. Yet its purpose is symbolic, to defy the taboo with the very act of ignition. And when it launches, screaming through the atmosphere like a red flare fired against heaven itself, the world trembles. For the first time since Atlas, humanity has dared to point itself back toward Mars. The authorities call it madness. Religious leaders denounce it as the opening of a second curse. Satellites scramble to track Sybil's trajectory. State media predicts its disintegration before leaving Earth's orbit. But then the heresy grows teeth. Against probability, Sybil clears the Van Allen belts. Against projections, its improvised thrusters align with orbital mechanics stolen from old textbooks. Against prophecy, it pierces into heliocentric orbit and begins its long, slow crawl toward Mars. And as the capsule drifts, broadcasting encrypted signals that repeat only one phrase, Atlas was a teacher, not a curse. Billions tune in. The chant becomes rebellion. In markets, in slums, in universities, in deserts, the words echo. Humanity has found its first true heretics in space. But with defiance comes the terrifying shadow of possibility. What if the heretics are right? And what if the curse of Atlas was never divine judgment, but simply physics, misunderstood, exaggerated, mythologized by traumatized generations. If Mars can be reached again, if its skies can be pierced and its soil touched, then the entire edifice of planetary superstition collapses. Governments that ruled by fear lose their authority. Religions built on cosmic silence fracture. Economies dependent on keeping Mars forbidden collapse overnight. And this, more than any fragment still circling the red planet, is the true worst case for the old order, that Atlas did not end humanity's expansion, but merely delayed it. As Sybil drifts closer to the Martian debris belt, the lingering halo of 3I/Atlas's shattered fragments, the entire world holds its breath. Every shard is a bullet, every orbit a dice throw. The capsule is too fragile, its shielding too thin. A single pebble of alien ice, moving at interstellar velocity, could annihilate it in silence. Yet that risk is the very essence of the dream, to challenge the interstellar trespass on its own field. To pass through Atlas's teeth and arrive intact would be nothing less than a declaration to the universe. Humanity has chosen courage over myth. The old guard prays for destruction. The dreamers pray for survival. And somewhere in the cold void between Earth and Mars, Sybil continues its silent heresy, bearing within it the most dangerous cargo of all, the refusal to believe that Atlas had the last word. The debris field of 3I/Atlas does not orbit Mars like a neat, predictable belt. It is a snarl, a cosmic snare of alien ice, fractured rock, and volatile dust, still carrying momentum from an interstellar past. Astronomers once described it as statistical chaos, a storm of fragments where Newton's laws hold, but prediction fails. Each shard is tracked with rough coordinates, but the maps are decades old, corrupted by orbital drift and gravitational nudges from Mars and the Sun. To reach the red planet is to thread a needle through a shifting labyrinth, where one miscalculation means annihilation. For Sybil, humanity's outlaw capsule, the path ahead is not an obstacle course, it is a trial by fire, and the world watches, split between those who hope the heretics are destroyed and those who pray for their impossible passage. The first sensors flare with proximity warnings at a distance of 200,000 kilometers from Mars. Sybil's primitive radar cannot resolve the entire field, only the largest fragments, chunks of ice kilometers across, tumbling like slow knives through the void. Smaller shards, no bigger than fists, move just as lethally, invisible to instruments until they strike. The capsule shudders as its crew, 3 dreamers chosen by lottery, not training, begin their descent into the minefield. The names of these heretics are known only in encrypted networks, for their identities were erased before launch to shield their families. To their followers, they are not individuals, but martyrs. To their enemies, they are sacrificial fools. But inside the capsule, the reality is simple. Keep Sybil alive 1 kilometer, 1 second, 1 orbit at a time. The first fragment passes within 700 meters. It is a lump of carbon ice the size of a car, glowing faintly in reflected sunlight. At interstellar velocity, it would slice Sybil in half without resistance. The capsule's thrusters roar, vectoring hard, their ancient nozzles glowing cherry red. The maneuver is violent, bone-shaking, straining the crew against their straps. One pilot vomits in her helmet, another prays into static. The third keeps eyes locked on the numbers, correcting course as if balancing on a knife edge. Earth receives telemetry delayed by minutes, but when the near miss is confirmed, the underground networks explode with jubilation. Through the teeth, they whisper, through the teeth of Atlas. But the teeth close fast. Within the next 36 hours, Sybil faces not one, not 10, but hundreds of near misses. Some are avoided with thruster burns that nearly exhaust their fuel reserves. Others pass so close the hull reverberates with static discharges, alien ice particles, ionizing against the capsule's thin shielding. Each maneuver buys survival at the cost of stability. Sybill's guidance systems, built from cannibalized civilian satellites, struggle to recalculate against chaos. The crew is running not on precision, but on faith and improvisation. Every hour brings them closer to both Mars and exhaustion. It is here, in the thick of the teeth, that the philosophical weight of Atlas strikes hardest. For centuries, humanity had feared that to confront Atlas was to court extinction, yet the heretics now live inside its jaws, daring it to strike them down. Each close call transforms the narrative. Every avoided collision weakens the myth. What was once seen as curse begins to look like test, and if tests can be survived, they can be passed. For the old order, this is the true terror, not that Sybil will be destroyed, but that it will endure. Then comes the moment that history will call the black collision. A fragment invisible to radar slams into Sybil's starboard thruster assembly, shearing off metal and sending the capsule into a deadly spin. Systems overload. Gyroscopes scream. The crew are slammed against their restraints as their blood pools in their skulls. The capsule is seconds away from tearing itself apart. To the world, the signal flatlines. For 2 full hours, Earth believes Sybil is dead. Governments declare the heresy extinguished. Sirens wail in celebration, calling the silence proof of Atlas's curse. But then, impossibly, the signal returns. The dreamers had done the unthinkable. In the middle of the spin, one crew member had overridden the autopilot and executed a manual burn, venting the last of their auxiliary fuel in a controlled detonation that restabilized the capsule. Sybil is crippled, half its thrusters gone, hull compromised, oxygen leaking, but alive. And alive is enough. Across the world, those who had doubted fall silent. Those who had whispered now shout. Through the teeth of Atlas, the chant becomes louder than any siren. Sybil limps forward, scarred but resolute, carrying with it the most dangerous proof in human history, that the curse of 3I/Atlas is not death but endurance. And if endurance is possible, then Mars is no longer forbidden. It is inevitable. The heretics aboard Sybil have passed through the unthinkable. They have threaded the labyrinth of 3I/Atlas's shattered fragments, bled fuel, cracked hull, and shredded systems. Now they face the most dangerous act of all, landing. Mars, as it exists post-Atlas, is not the planet imagined by old colonization dreams. Its surface is scarred with fresh craters, some spanning tens of kilometers, carved by Atlas's fragments during the October 3rd catastrophe. The atmosphere, already tenuous, still carries chemical ghosts of alien dust, carbon-rich particles that shimmer strangely in the thin air. Radiation levels remain unstable, with pockets of ionization detected from residual cometary materials. Mars is not the sterile, predictable desert of textbooks anymore. It is an alien battlefield. To land here is not merely a technical challenge. It is a theological violation of centuries of taboo. Sybil's descent systems are laughably inadequate for what lies ahead. The capsule was built to defy fear, not survive Mars's gauntlet. Its parachutes are stitched from scavenged polymer, its retro thrusters salvaged from obsolete boosters, its heat shielding pockmarked and cracked. And yet, this patchwork arc carries with it the one payload more explosive than any warhead, the proof that humanity refuses to bow to myth. As Sybil enters the thin Martian atmosphere, every system begins to scream. The heat shield glows white-hot, chunks breaking off in incandescent streaks. The capsule shakes like a drum beaten by the gods. Telemetry sent back to Earth is scrambled with static. For long minutes, all that can be seen is fire. Then, impossibly, Sybil survives re-entry. At 20 kilometers above the surface, its parachutes deploy not smoothly, but violently, half-torn, jerking the capsule into a brutal deceleration. The crew is battered, bruised on the edge of blackout. At 5 kilometers, the retro thrusters ignite. What little fuel remains coughs into flame, slowing the descent just enough to prevent annihilation. And then, with a thunder that echoes across the empty plains, Sybil slams into the Martian regolith. Not a gentle landing, not a precise touchdown, an impact, survivable only by stubborn luck, but survive it does. Humanity has landed on Mars again. The landing site is no sanctuary. It lies near the rim of one of the largest craters gouged by Atlas fragments, a scar 37 kilometers wide, rimmed with shattered cliffs and glazed with exotic ices. The surface is littered with black dust, unlike anything in solar system geology. Instruments begin transmitting data. The dust is laced with organics, alien hydrocarbons, complex molecules that suggest chemical systems forged beyond our sun. To scientists on Earth, this is discovery beyond imagination. To priests and rulers who preached Mars as cursed, it is confirmation that Atlas brought not divine wrath but alien legacy. And to the dreamers, it is vindication. Mars is no longer forbidden ground. It is now contested ground. The crew of Sybil stumbles onto the surface. Their suits are outdated, patched, designed to barely hold pressure. Yet as they plant their boots into the red soil, laced with alien black, they send back an image that instantly becomes the most dangerous icon in human history. The human figure standing upright against the crater of Atlas. For billions watching across Earth, the myth collapses. Sirens cannot silence what eyes have seen. Mars is no longer the cursed tomb of Atlas. It is the place where defiance touched ground. But victory brings terror. Sybil's systems are failing. Oxygen is limited. Radiation levels spike higher than predicted. And as instruments probe deeper into the soil, anomalies emerge. Chemical activity that cannot be explained by natural processes alone. Something in the alien dust is reacting to their presence, shifting under analysis, releasing faint energies. The worst-case scenario returns in a new form. Not death by impact, not silence in orbit, but the possibility that Atlas has seeded Mars with alien chemistry that humanity barely comprehends. The heretics have not merely landed, they may have awakened something. The world divides in real time. Governments call for immediate termination of the mission. Religious authorities demand that the crew be abandoned, left to die on Mars as punishment. But the people, the billions who saw the landing, demand continuation. Protests erupt, chants echo through the teeth of Atlas, onto the cursed world, and still we stand. Humanity is split between fear and triumph, superstition and science, paralysis and courage, and all the while, the crew of Sybil struggles to keep their systems alive, knowing their every breath is rewriting human history. The curse of 3I/Atlas was never in the stars, it was in humanity's mind. And now, on the surface of Mars, 3 heretics have struck the first blow against it. The soil around Sybil is not quiet. At first it seems like dust, lifeless powder scattered across the crater rim by ancient winds. But within hours of landing, The crew begins to notice subtle anomalies. Their boots leave impressions that do not collapse with gravity's pull, as Martian regoliths should. Instead, the edges of the prints shift slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if the dust resists stillness. When the crew sets up their improvised instruments, readings return values that make no sense. Fluctuations in electromagnetic fields, faint emissions of low-frequency radiation, and thermal pulses that seem to ripple outward from the crater like a heartbeat. Atlas has not left Mars as it found it. The black dust is alive, not biologically but energetically, behaving as though it carries memory of the interstellar object that birthed it. Earth's scientific community goes into uproar. Secure channels hum with raw telemetry, carbon-rich chains coiled into exotic geometries, hydrocarbons interlaced with traces of metallic isotopes unknown in the solar system. Some compare it to a catalyst, an alien scaffold waiting for conditions to ignite chemistry beyond Earth's understanding. Others argue it is more sinister, a form of self-organizing matter, not alive in any terrestrial sense, but capable of reaction, propagation, and perhaps adaptation. The phrase whispered through encrypted networks chills even hardened researchers. Prebiotic intelligence. If Atlas seeded this chemistry, then Mars is no longer a dead world. It is an experiment in progress. For the crew, theory matters less than survival. Their oxygen reserves drop, their shielding is compromised, and now their instruments detect something stranger still. The black soil emits faint electromagnetic signatures that interfere with their suit radios. Voices echo, distorted, carrying fragments of their own speech, repeated seconds later, as if the soil itself is mimicking them. At first, they dismiss it as feedback, but when one crew member whispers a private prayer, thinking their mic muted, the voice returns, garbled, but unmistakably from outside the suit. The soil is not only reacting, it is listening. The worst-case scenario sharpens. What if the curse of Atlas was never about craters or fragments, but contamination? What if the black soil represents not destruction, but transformation of Mars into a world no longer safe for humans? Governments seize on the new data to declare the heretics an existential threat. Broadcasts warn that their very presence risks activating whatever processes the dust contains. Sirens return to cities, louder than ever, now with the force of proof behind them. Atlas carried something alien, and the dreamers have unleashed it. Executions are promised if they ever attempt return. But on the streets, the reaction is reversed. Billions see the black soil as revelation. For the first time in history, humanity has touched material from beyond its solar neighborhood. It is not curse, it is contact. Inside Sybil, the choice grows desperate. Their supplies will not last more than a few sols. Their capsule is crippled, incapable of ascent. Yet to die quietly is to let the old order claim victory, to say the curse has claimed its martyrs. Instead, the crew begins to dig. With crude tools and gloved hands, they scoop the black soil into containers. Each gram of it is more dangerous than any weapon on Earth, alien chemistry that could either unlock a new epoch of science or doom every colony that touches it. They know they cannot bring it home, they cannot even leave the crater, but they can send it. Sybil's last functioning comms array is reconfigured into a crude mass driver. Using jury-rigged coils and their remaining power cells, the heretics plan to launch a capsule of black soil samples into orbit, where sympathetic satellites might capture it. It is the most dangerous act yet, to deliver alien material directly into humanity's hands, bypassing governments, bypassing fear, bypassing myth. If successful, it will prove beyond denial that Atlas was not curse but message. If it fails, the soil will scatter across Mars's thin winds, perhaps altering the planet irreversibly. Either way, Mars has awakened, and the black dust will not sleep again. The crew transmits one last message before initiating the sequence. It is short, ragged, their voices barely audible through failing comms. Atlas was never warning, it was invitation. Mars is not tomb. Mars is threshold. Do not waste it. And then the mass driver ignites, hurling a capsule of alien soil into the sky above Mars, a black spark rising against the red horizon, carrying within it the most dangerous truth in human history. The capsule arcs above Mars like a black ember, trailing sparks of improvised propulsion. For a moment, it seems to vanish against the void. Then the telemetry spikes. Sybil's final package, 1.4 kilograms of Atlas-contaminated soil sealed in a ceramic pod, escapes the Martian atmosphere. The heretics have done the impossible. With no hope of rescue, no chance of survival, they have placed humanity's hand directly on the legacy of 3I/Atlas. And as the pod rises, Sybil falls silent. No further transmissions, no life signs, only static. The crew's final act is not survival, but seeding the truth. The capsule is now the most valuable object in the solar system, a weapon or a key, depending on who claims it first. On Earth, the response is instant chaos. Governments intercept the final transmission, broadcasting heavily edited versions to their citizens. Official media declares it a hoax. The soil capsule never existed, the data corrupted by atmospheric interference, the heretics victims of their own madness. Sirens howl again, louder than ever, repeating the message drilled into generations. Mars is cursed. Mars is death. Do not return. But the raw data leaks within hours. Independent satellites confirm the capsule is in orbit around Mars, transmitting a low-power beacon. Its trajectory suggests it will remain stable for at least several months, long enough to be retrieved. Suddenly, Mars is no longer forbidden in theory. It is an open vault waiting to be cracked. The schism fractures the planet. Underground networks proclaim the heretics as martyrs, saints of defiance. Their final words, Mars is threshold, spread like wildfire, printed on banners, whispered in classrooms, etched into graffiti across megacities. Young scientists hack into orbital telescopes to track the capsule themselves, their grainy images flooding social channels with proof of its existence. Meanwhile, regimes that built their legitimacy on Atlas's curse scramble to suppress the evidence. In some nations, possession of the transmission becomes treason. Black markets explode with counterfeit data files, claiming to contain raw readings from the soil. Humanity is divided not by borders, but by belief, those who cling to silence and those who chase the signal. Yet beyond the politics, beyond the chance, lies the true terror. The data fragments sent before Sybil's silence show something Earth can no longer dismiss. The black soil is not inert, and it fluctuates in mass readings as though rearranging internally. It emits radiation patterns inconsistent with any known decay, and its electromagnetic echoes suggest rudimentary signal behavior, call and response dynamics when stimulated with radio frequencies. Scientists hesitate to say the word aloud, but whispers spread. Proto-communication. The soil might not simply contain chemistry. It might be attempting to answer. If so, Atlas did not just deliver alien dust. It delivered something that wants to speak. The capsule in orbit becomes humanity's mirror. Who dares to retrieve it? Some argue it must be destroyed before it destabilizes Mars or contaminates Earth. Others argue it must be captured and studied at any cost, even if it means opening Pandora's box. Secret missions begin mobilizing. A coalition of dreamer sympathizers plots to launch a private retrieval using stolen booster designs, while state militaries quietly prepare interceptors to seize or vaporize the capsule. Every faction knows one truth: whoever touches the soil first will dictate the story of Atlas for all humanity. Meanwhile, silence deepens from Mars. No further signals from Sybil. No evidence of survivors. Just a black crater rim, still glowing faintly with chemical anomalies, and a tiny pod circling above it like a shard of forbidden fire. The world waits, breath held, divided by fear and hunger. The heretics gave humanity a gift wrapped in terror, a signal to answer, a silence to interpret. And now, for the first time since Atlas appeared, the question is not whether humanity will defy the curse, but whether it is ready for what the soil might say back. In the end, 3I/Atlas was never about the impact, the craters, or even the black soil that whispered strange echoes beneath Martian skies. It was about the stories humanity built around it. Stories of terror, of curses, of divine warnings, and cosmic prohibitions. For generations, the comet was treated as a phantom executioner, a reminder that humanity's ambitions were fragile, that Mars was never meant for our kind. Sirens became the anthem of obedience, silencing not only the skies, but imagination itself. Yet Atlas's true gift, its most dangerous payload, was never physical at all. It was the challenge it posed to human fear. The heretics of Sybil proved this with their blood. They passed through the teeth of alien fragments, landed on a world declared untouchable, and stood in the crater of Atlas to declare the unthinkable. Mars is not tomb, Mars is threshold. Their last act, hurling the black soil into orbit, was less about science than about defiance. A message carved in physics, undeniable, uncontainable, proof that humanity could endure what superstition had called impossible. In doing so, they ripped the myth of Atlas apart. Governments may still chant their curses, and priests may still declare damnation, but the world has seen otherwise. The curse is broken. Yet breaking the curse reveals a deeper terror. The black soil is not silent. Its strange emissions, its shifting geometries, its mimicry of human signals, these suggest that Atlas did not merely wound Mars, but seeded it with an alien inheritance. Was it accident or design? Was Atlas a dying wanderer scattering fragments blindly across worlds, or a deliberate messenger sent to awaken chemistry where silence once reigned? Humanity cannot yet answer, but one truth is inescapable. The universe is not quiet. It is not safe. It is not ours to tame with myth. The real worst-case scenario is not that Atlas destroyed Mars, nor that its soil carries danger. It is that humanity chooses ignorance, that we retreat again into sirens, into silence, into fear. If we do, we will abandon not only Mars, but ourselves. For the legacy of Atlas is this, that the cosmos will not wait for us. Interstellar visitors will come again, carrying ice and dust, chemistry and chaos, messages we may not yet know how to read. If we choose paralysis, we will meet them unprepared. And if we choose courage, even at unbearable risk, then the heretic's sacrifice will have meaning. Mars still waits. Its skies are scarred, its soil alive with mysteries. The black capsule circles above it, beacon humming, daring us to decide what kind of species we are. Will we answer Atlas as fearful children clinging to curses, or as heirs of the stars, ready to embrace the danger of knowledge? The universe does not care, but history will, and so the conclusion is not an ending, but a threshold. Atlas came, and in its wake, humanity was given the hardest gift, the chance to decide whether we are meant to remain earthbound, or whether, like the heretics of Sybil, we are finally ready to walk into the teeth of the unknown, knowing it may devour us, but refusing ever again to be ruled by fear.